Well, hello there. Omni-sensei here with What If Itachi Uchiha Was Reborn in Jujutsu in the Gojo Clan, Part 2. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
They sat around a table with 3 chairs and 3 cups of tea. Jiki ignored the glare the old woman was giving him, while Nobara vibrated in her chair with the hyperactive energy of a teen. Focusing his gaze on the interior decoration of the house, he noted his earlier assumption about the house was correct. It was at least over 200 years old, with wooden floorboards that had been replaced and old statues dotting the house. The table they sat around had the bearing of age, even though it was pristine and well taken care of. The cups had nearly imperceptible scratches formed from long use. The moment he dropped his cup after taking his last sip, the older woman spoke. "So what are you doing here, kid? This region is off-limits to your clan." That was news to him. He blinked back at her, his features passive. Satoru had not told him anything about this when he let him know he was traveling here. Unless it was information Oldman Tatsumi forgot to pass on. After giving it another thought, he realized the older man probably passed it on, and Satoru just didn't care. Showing naivety or ignorance never helped anybody and would set him on the back foot against the already hostile woman, so he ignored her question and asked one of his own instead. "Something is going on in your village. What is it?" "That's none of your business, brat. It became mine the moment Aiko was forced to come back here to take care of her comatose parents," he fired back with more anger than he expected. "The Ito family was affected as well?" the older woman asked, suddenly tired and losing all the fire and vinegar that seemed to fuel her. But her words were a confirmation that she knew what was going on. "I told you that already, Grandma," Nobara spoke from her place on the table, looking at the older woman with a concerned gaze. "I see." The older woman had a faraway look in her eyes. Before she finally stood up, grabbed her cane, and walked out of the house. "Forgive her. Her memory is not what it used to be," Nobara started as they both watched the older woman walk toward the forest. "According to the villagers, a few years ago, something happened. Something she won't tell me anything about. But what everyone knows is that it was caused by a man and a woman. Both with white hair," she finished, giving a glance at his. "So whatever happened here occurred just before he was born." He didn't like mysteries in general, and this particular one seemed to be growing even more complex with the more people he spoke to about it. "Anyway, how long are you staying for?" "We don't generally get visitors around here," she said while parting her hair to the side in what he noted was a bashful gesture. "We've not decided yet," he answered with a shrug before standing up to follow the older woman, heedless of the disappointed look on the younger girl's face. It took him less than a second to pick up her tracks and start following just behind. Her footsteps took her from the clearing and further into the forest. He stopped at the border of the forest. This close, he could feel the heavy and malevolent cursed energy that was tinged by great amounts of desire and grief. He took a solid breath before plunging in. His first step into the forest was 2 times heavier than it should be. The second was 3 times as heavy, he noted with a frown as his feet sank into the soft earth by an inch, and he felt the pressure weigh heavier on him. Looking at the footprint of the older woman, he noted that hers remained constant throughout. So whatever was applying the pressure was purposely restricting him from entering. For a second, he considered if he was about to enter a domain. He had never actually witnessed one, and the only person he knew with access to one spent most of his time at Jujutsu High. Shrugging away the thought but keeping it at the back of his mind, he let his cursed energy flow from the pit in his core and felt it sink in and reinforce his more fragile frame. 50 meters in, and he already had an idea of where the older woman was heading to. On his journey over, there was only a single noteworthy structure here, and it was not exactly a stretch of the imagination to figure out that was where she was heading to. A few more meters in, he could see the clearing vaguely ahead of him and stopped. The pressure had also gotten worse, he noted with an annoyed frown. If he took another step toward it, the pressure weighing down on him would slow him down more than he was ready to accept, especially in a combat situation. "I'm surprised you even managed to make it this far, brat," the older woman called out without looking back from her position ahead. "Then again, you managed to deflect my maximum hairpin, so I guess you're not just a random brat, heh?" He turned his eyes at her before moving them to the huge structure she stood in front of. It was a straw doll, as he accurately noted before. Its features are lost to time and weather. The details got clearer this close. The chain that held it bound was rusted and corroded. The spikes that held the statue down were originally 8, he judged by the holes in the ground. Now all that remained was 3. The paper talismans on the statue looked faded and torn. The longer he stayed this close, the more time he had to acclimate to the pressure weighing on him. He felt himself forcing air down his lungs as he looked at the woman's unaffected back as she stood in front of the structure while he struggled. "If you knew what was here, you wouldn't have dared get this close," she continued before turning her head back to give him a grim smile. "Then again, you Gojo have always overestimated yourselves. Leave, boy. I'll come find you." He gave her a flat stare, and in an unfamiliar show of brashness, he held his ground until the sudden creaking of the chain and a snap sent him ankle-deep into the ground. In the space of a heartbeat, he jumped back, fully cratering the ground, while giving the older woman and the statue one last look before retreating. The farther he got away from the straw doll, the more the pressure seemed to fall off him, till he was out of the forest completely. He considered waiting for the old woman indoors, but thought against it. Noon was close, and he had still not spoken to Aiko. Instead of roof-hopping, he started walking towards the house, uncaring of the eerie stares he received. Halfway to the building Aiko's parents called home, he met the older woman, Old Woman Kimiko. She stood in the middle of the pathway, seemingly waiting for him. Unlike when he was with Aiko, the woman didn't care to hide her feelings about him. "What are you doing here?" He ignored the question and sent his cursed energy into his eyes, activating his Sharingan once more. Staring down at the woman once more, he noted a familiar cursed energy wrapped around hers. The closest approximation he had was the silky and mutable nature of a spider's webs, sunk deep into an aged frame. The same cursed energy he felt back in the forest. He glanced around and realized the street was suddenly empty. Priming his cursed energy once more, he allowed himself to settle into a loose stance. It was all coming together slowly now, but he had an idea of what was going on. The clues had been vague, and the stories distorted. But his title of a once-in-a-generation prodigy was not just because he was a better killer than most. Matching his silence and half-lidded stare with an ever-increasing snarl on her face, she moved to speak once more before a spike of cursed energy coming from the forest silenced her. This time with his senses on full alert and his Sharingan active, he picked the thread linking the woman back to the forest. The woman's previously furious appearance seemed to mellow out, giving him a lazy look that matched his own and a smile that reminded him of a cat. She spun on her heels and walked off without a word. He watched her walk away with jerky movements and followed her steps with an increasing frown till she turned the corner. Continuing his walk down to the house with more haste than he began, he burst into the house, preparing for the worst, only to meet the red-eyed and surprised figure of Aiko carrying a plate of food. "I wanted to get you breakfast, but I was not aware of when you left," she started with a guilty expression on her face. Even in a time like this with her world falling around her, she still tried to serve him. "It's all right, Aiko," he replied to her, tone soft. "I just went for a walk." Her eyes drifted down to his midriff, and she spotted the bloodied gash where old woman Kujisaki's spike almost tore through his side. Rushing to his side in one smooth movement, she dropped the plate and food and maneuvered him into the closest chair while ignoring his complaints that she shouldn't bother. Removing his shirt with smooth familiarity, she went to her bags before bringing out a first aid box, cleaning up the cut, and bandaging it. "It was just a flesh wound, you know," he told her while poking at the bandage he was sure was bound tighter than needed. "That is not enough reason to walk about with an open injury. What if it gets infected?" She looked down on him with an imperious tilt of her head. The unseriousness of the moment had them burst into laughter. Aiko laughed for a few long seconds before he suddenly heard the laugh transition into hiccups and sobs. Moving to his feet, he held her tight in a hug and wrapped her around himself. For the first time, he realized they were almost the same height. "It's all right, Aiko. I'll get them out of there and put a stop to what is happening," he promised her with certainty lacing his tone. It didn't take long for her to fall asleep in his hands, and it took him the work of a minute to lift her up, climb the stairs, and place her in the bedroom they were supposed to share. Her bed was still untouched, as she never had the chance to sleep in it since she spent the past 24 hours taking care of her parents. Her sudden exhaustion was understandable. This was the first chance he had to really check out Aiko's parents, and he took it. He stood in front of their open-eyed comatose forms and opened his senses completely. A deeper look at them formed a frown on his face once more. The same web-like structure of cursed energy he found in old woman Kimiko was also spread around their body. From the way their cursed energy was diluted and drawn out, He assumed it was a variation of the same technique. But instead of controlling or puppeteering their bodies, it seemed to drain them of something. If he were to guess, he'd say their innate life force in order to bolster something else. So where was it going to? The statue? Knock, knock. His attention was broken from observing the comatose couple as he snapped his head to the door. The sound of footsteps coming down the stairs forced his eyes back up to see Aiko walking down as she rubbed her eyes awake. I know someone is awake in there. Don't keep an old woman waiting. The annoyed voice of the old hag Kujisaki forced him to frown even harder. Aiko rushed to the door, suddenly wide awake, opening the door to the woman. She rushed up and buried the woman in a full hug. Granny Kujisaki. It's okay, kid. Granny Kujisaki is here now. Where are they? He sat up and stretched his stiff body to the cracks and pops of bones and joints. The old woman's eyes snapped to him, and he stared her down with uncaring eyes before tilting his head at the comatose couple on the chair. She broke off the hug from Aiko before walking up to the old couple and grabbing them by their hands and closing her eyes. Her heavy sigh seemed to confirm her fears, and she staggered back to her feet with Aiko's aid. I always knew it would come back to torment us. I just never thought we would be alive to suffer it, you know, the old woman started, with a faraway look in her eyes even as Aiko guided her to a chair to sit. What are you talking about? Aiko asked with a sudden fearful expression. The old woman was silent, staring back at the couple with unseeing brown eyes. A mistake, she began. Our blood-soaked and cursed history. We were desperate enough to serve her as a deity for centuries when one of the vengeful spirits held Japan in a tight and even bloodier grip. She feasted and grew off our pain and blood for centuries. Can you imagine what centuries of that would create? The image that was beginning to form was one he was finding himself increasingly hard to imagine. Centuries passed, and her power both protected and leashed us to her will. It took long enough, but one day even we got tired of the sacrifices we had to make and decided to put an end to it. At least some of us did, she finished with a harsh laugh that was all pain and zero humor. Some of us had grown so reliant on her, so used to that control, that they couldn't accept the thought of losing that rigid structure of their life. She kept quiet after that, seemingly lost in thought. What happened, Granny? Aiko broke her thought, with her hand held tight in front of her. We asked for help, she said simply, before sinking back into bitter memories. Even with help, we were not powerful enough to be certain of a sure kill, so we managed to seal and bind her instead through trickery. The seal would have lasted another generation before it started to weaken if not for that bitch. The sudden vitriol from the woman shocked him, but his only response was a raised brow. He had an idea of who she was talking about after all. Old woman Kimiko, he stated. Kimiko, she agreed with a nod. She argued against the binding, and I was stupid enough to think my old friend was more concerned about our safety than her true hidden loyalty to her. So she botched it? Aiko asked as she sat herself down on shaky knees. What do my parents have to do with this? Not at first, she didn't. The sealing ritual went off without a hitch, as few people knew what was planned to happen. I had hoped with her sealed, maybe, just maybe, our future generations would have a chance for a life without her corruptive touch lingering. It clicked in his head. That's why almost all the other older people in town have a technique slowly awakening in them, but not the younger children, he spoke, looking at her with his Sharingan active. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see the same web-like structure around the woman. That was why you were able to be in her presence so easily. Yes, she agreed easily, even as she stared back at his Sharingan, unnerved. But I saw the same thing on the kids that tried to bully Nobara. What? The woman suddenly stood up, her strength seemingly returned. That's impossible. She's not free yet. His flat-eyed, apathetic stare was his only reply. That bitch, Kimiko. She must have found another way past the seal, the older woman growled out in anger. She had been her most subservient follower before we managed to seal her. And my parents? Aiko interjected once more. I was not certain earlier, but I am now. Kimiko must have found some way to get past the weakened seal, and it must have used that chance to reactivate its implanted technique on the people weak enough to be unable to resist. Why was Kimiko happy Aiko was back then? He asked, suspicion heavy in his tone. Why else? The older woman answered with a sardonic tone in her voice. To return things back to the way they were. Cold sweat went down his back as he remembered the way the particular technique on Aiko's parents worked. Instead of simply manipulating their body, whatever this cursed spirit was, it was sucking out their life force instead. A variation of its original technique? The cursed spirit is trying to break free and incarnate, he stated as he sent searching eyes back at the older woman, hoping she would prove him wrong for the first time. Her steady grim nod was enough reason for him to curse his intellect. A centuries-old cursed spirit. He could not even imagine how much more powerful she had grown, with the villagers as her farm, for them to struggle to seal her instead of killing her on the spot. What was its name? He asked with a deep breath as he prepared himself. Special grade cursed spirit, Juragumo, the old woman whispered the name in a low tone with wary eyes that searched the darkness. Yet, for all her whispering, the name had a certain metaphysical weight to it that hung in the air, seemingly stifling, while the phantom clacking of archaic feet on the wooden floorboard rang out. The mere mention of the name was enough to draw its attention to them. A special grade? I'll have to call Satoru, he said as he gave the scared Aiko a glance. Jiki won't let his pride stop. A shout tore through a ragged throat as it echoed out from farther away from them. Emerge from darkness blacker than darkness. Purify that which is impure. A sharp spike of cursed energy followed the words, as he felt cursed energy manifest and spread out above them. Old woman Kujisake quickly stumbled to her feet with the aid of her walking stick before rushing out of the front door in haste. In a blur of movement, Jiki was on the roof of the story building, watching as a miasma of black curse techniques spread out from just above them, down to the edges of even his prodigious vision. The whole town then, he mused. What was that? He asked as the older woman finally made her way out to watch the end process of the technique activation. A veil. A well-formed one too. Kimiko must be in a hurry. I've got to put a stop to her madness before she ends us all. With a nod of his head in agreement, he looked at the door just as Aiko stepped out with hurried movements. There's no service, she called out, waving the phone at him. His eyes picked up the image of a red bar. It's a specialized veil then, the older woman called out while looking at the technique's completion. The question is, why would she even bother with one? Specialized veil, he asked idly as he tried to pick up old woman Kimiko's cursed energy. But since the release of the veil, he had been picking up multiple cursed energy signatures moving toward them. People or cursed spirits? Assailants? He turned his attention from the incoming people back to Granny Kujisaki as she replied. A specialized kind of barrier. Its activation sacrifices flexibility for more restrictions. He had an idea of who the barrier would be restricting after hearing that, but it was not like him to act on just maybes and without a solid plan and concrete evidence. Watch Aiko, he called out as he turned towards the long pathway they had taken into the small village. With a flex of his cursed energy, he went bounding off toward the boundary between the veil and the outer world. In a straight line, heedless of the obstacles in his way, he ran at full tilt. Jumping over houses, roof running, and finally blitzing down the long stretch of walkway that led to the bus stop they had dropped. He finally came to a full stop in front of the veil by skidding across the ground and slowing his intense momentum. The moment he got to the barrier and pressed his hands around it, it repulsed him and forced him a few steps back. That confirmed it. He was the one the barrier was specialized against. The question was why. With a single step back to brace himself, he cocked a fist back, ready to put some real force into it. A shuffle of footsteps behind him, and he turned casually to regard the owners. An older man, maybe 50 years old, with brown hair and eyes. A heavy physique with sun-darkened skin indicated heavy labor on a farm. He was dressed in simple night clothes with empty blank eyes that struggled to follow his movements. Just behind the man was a woman, dressed in similar night clothes but with a darker shade of brown hair. Couples? He had passed a couple of smaller buildings not far from here. They moved to him with slow shuffling at first, before the shuffle transitioned to a jog that suddenly picked up speed as they charged towards him with synchronized and frantic movements that made him peer deeper at their being. The familiar look of a sticky, thread-like substance that wrapped and entangled the very essence of their being made it clear who was really in control. The special grade curse was somehow puppeteering their figures even from behind her seal. With his attention on them, they continued charging at him with reckless abandon, all the while without making a single sound, other than the meaty sound of bare feet slapping against the ground. He met the first one and dodged its wild lunge, swiftly moving on to the woman, while ignoring the random flailing man behind him trying to get back to his feet. The curse's control was not perfect then, he noted. Must be an effect of the seal. Even weakened, it was not something that just anyone would mess with. He sent a very mundane palm strike into the charging woman's tummy, then an elbow to the side of the head the moment she fell over to knock her out. He stood above her fallen form and noted that while they might be controlled, the technique didn't suddenly make them more than they already were. It had simply turned a placid old couple into rabid humans. Without looking, he tilted his head to the side and dodged the blow thrown at the back of his head. It had finally recovered enough to control the older man's limbs, and it only took it 3 seconds, he noted. Suboptimal. With a swift movement, he goes low and sweeps the man off his feet. A split second later, he joins the man mid-air and slams the heel of his foot into the side of his slightly balding head. The man drops like a sack of bricks. His previous rabid features shift back as he sinks into the oblivion that is unconsciousness. The shuffle of multiple footsteps forces his eyes up, and he bears witness to over a dozen shambling older men and women. This was a futile attempt at stopping him. He knew it. Whatever was controlling the villagers knew this also, so why even bother? Another loud snap filled with cursed energy blew through the village, and he almost dismissed it till his brain dredged up a memory, and he deduced it for what it was. The first time he heard that particular sound. A chain snapping. The chain around the straw statue. The cursed spirit. With that realization came clarity. This was all a distraction. Ignoring the slapping of bare feet on concrete as the rabid men and women ran to him with eerie abandon, he charted the optimal path back to the forest. He was not certain he could beat a centuries-old cursed spirit, but he knew all he had to do was make a big enough mess, and Satoru was sure to notice even with the barrier up. A smile came easy to him this time. With a running start at the lead charging man, he jumped and buried his foot into the face of the empty-eyed man, using it as a platform to leap over the masses of mundane men and women and onto the roof of a nearby building. For a second, he considered what would have happened if he were facing actual jujutsu sorcerers instead of elderly men and women and had to fight a shiver down. The technique was borderline insidious. Finally turning his attention away from the horde beneath him, he started moving toward the forest that demarcated the mountain range from the village. She had rushed back to the boundary, where her greatest act of sacrifice was achieved, where she committed a deed that would have put her name in the history books with the likes of Arashir Toma, the man who split and sealed the special grade curse Sukuna. If she cared for it. Sparing only a glance at her house, she didn't bother to step in. The cracked glasses and shattered walls were enough to let her know that Kimiko had gone for Nobara. Unfortunately, after the monstrous Gojo clan brat had broken through her strongest seal trap, it must not have taken her much to break through the weakened seal formation that she never had the time to reinforce. The thought of her granddaughter in the hands of that woman was enough anger to fuel her walk. She barged into the forest and almost recoiled at the feeling of Joragumo's touch on her soul once more. Aiko stepped in just after her and flinched. The beautiful but scarred amber-eyed girl had escaped the worst of the monster's touch and technique as a child. But the few minutes Joragumo was semi-released 14 years ago was enough for her touch to linger on the child. She remembered how the brat had forced his way into her presence with the bravery of the ignorant. A splitting image of the last time 2 other Gojos broke in with the manipulation of Kimiko and almost destroyed the seal that held Joragumo. Brushing a stray branch out of her sight, she powered forward with anger-induced momentum and stumbled on an overgrown root. It was only the quick action of Aiko that saved her from planting her face into the ground. A flitting glance, and she saw the way the poor girl was holding up. Much better than Chio expected if she was completely honest. The girl had grown into her own person now. Even the scars had done little to detract from her beauty and resilience. She was almost certain that the scar was somehow the white-haired brat's fault. The moment they broke into the clearing that housed the sealed and bound straw doll, she drew in a sharp breath. 4 chains had snapped, while only a single nail held the straw doll to the ground. The seals that should have suppressed Joragumo's awareness were all burnt up, and she could almost feel the 8 eyes of the malevolent cursed spirit peer deep into her very being. The seals could not have degraded this fast. Not when she had made sure to check up on it just that morning. The reason this horror was happening was in front of her. Over 30 villagers knelt before the straw doll in a wide overlapping circle and with their heads to the ground in an act of worship. Even with their heads bowed, she could recognize most of them as the older villagers who had experienced Joragumo's touch. The younger people there were as a result of her failure for not noticing how much Kimiko had weakened it. Nobara's presence here was an even greater show of her failure as a protector and, more importantly, as a grandmother. Luckily the Itos were not there, at least not after they had bound their forms to the bed before leaving. The mastermind of this atrocity stood in the shadow of the giant straw doll and watched her walk up with a mad and delighted smile on her face. Even after 3 decades of knowing Kimiko, she never would have expected her to be this mad. Sharp brown eyes buried in a weathered face filled with fury stared down the uncaring visage of the other woman. "Why?" she rasped out at the older woman, while Aiko stood behind her with a horrified look as she watched men and women she knew as children get the very essence of their being sucked out to reinforce the creature sealed in the straw doll. Even with her lack of innate technique, the cursed energy flowing in a web-like pattern linking the bowed figures to the straw doll was very visible due to the sheer density of the energy present. She focused her attention on the other woman and continued, "We were finally free of that monster, so why? Why are you trying so hard to put us back under her feet?" The other woman tilted her head at her and gave her a toothless smile before replying. "Because she is mother. You might have forgotten, but her silks comforted us, her carcass guided us, and under her wings were we nurtured and protected. You used to know that, Kujisaki. What happened to you?" "Protected?" The woman known as Granny Kujisaki spat out the question as she took a step forward. "Her silks strangled us, while her caresses held us bound to centuries of slavery. We had no choice but to leave with fear every night, in fear of whom she might take the next morning. We were nothing but cattle." "You asked what changed?" "Clarity." She barked out, her anger giving her strength as she took another step toward the other woman. "Losing children to a capricious deity and knowing that I'll also lose grandchildren disabused me of the thought of any more worship." Letting out a tired breath, she looked at the uncaring visage of her former best friend. "You would have understood that if you ever loved someone other than her." Those were the words that finally broke through the stoic and uncaring visage of her old friend. "Don't you dare speak of her like you know her. Like you didn't betray her and trap her for decades." "Of course I know her." Granny Kujisaki replied back, as a tired, sad, and regretful smile spread out on her lips. "After all, I used to be her favorite." With those final words as a spark, the other woman's visage contorted into a mask of anger and jealousy. Reversed cursed technique. Call of the anguished fallen. Kimiko barked out as she pressed her hands together to form an ox hand sign. The fingers on her right hand were vertical, with the fingers on her left hand intersecting it halfway horizontally. Kujisaki watched as 4 skeletons crawled and forced their way out of the earth's grip with bone-tipped hands and uncaring savagery. They dug their way up with a vengeful and accursed fallen. Kimiko's innate technique was nothing special by itself. It had been formed after multiple generations of her bloodline's servitude and worship to Joragumo, and was simply the act of sacrificing people to the cursed spirit and taking a shred of their cursed energy for herself. The reversed curse technique was where the threat was. Using positive and negative cursed energy, she brought back people that had been sacrificed to Joragumo in a mockery of half-life with a positive cursed energy, and with a negative cursed energy, she empowered their forms with false muscle and heavy reinforced bones to do battle for her sake. That was why she chose this place for them to face each other. This was where the shrine housing the false deity they worshipped used to be. This was the location for some of the most horrific sacrifices Japan had ever witnessed. This was where 2 young girls grew up on the knees of the monster as her favorite shrine maidens. This was where 2 best friends would have had their last and final bout. The creaking of the chains as another link was on the verge of snapping made her sigh. With a wave for Aiko to step back, she held her walking cane tight before throwing the stick up. Mid-air, the single walking stick split apart and separated into multiple thin shards that floated to surround her. Spikes. The last shrine maidens faced each other on the unhallowed grounds of a false deity under a full moon with the bodies of unwilling supplicants as a backdrop. With a flex of her will and cursed energy, she sent the first of 6 thin spikes at Kimiko. With another flex of will, the remaining 5 lowered to hover around her, distracting Kimiko's attention from Aiko's movement toward the fallen form of Nobara. The spike blurred towards the older woman but lacked the supersonic speed it could have gotten from the hairpin technique. One of the incarnated fallen charged forward heedless of the depressions it left in the earth with its every step and jumped in defense of the woman, taking the first spike straight through its unarmored eyes. Kimiko was forced to drop to her knees as she forced her hand into an inverted bowl-shaped seal in order to control the remaining incarnations better. 1 incarnation stayed behind to protect the frail woman, while the remaining 2 charged at her with heavy stomps that indicated their immense frames. The last one, which still had her attention, struggled back to its feet, she noted with an annoyed frown. If they didn't have any real weak points, The best way to immobilize them would be to disrupt their cursed energy completely. With a snap of her finger and a flex of cursed energy, the spike she had buried into the incarnation multiplied and destroyed the body from the inside out, with the remaining shards bursting out of the body and impaling the other incarnation protecting Kimiko. What? The other woman cried out in shock as she stumbled back from her kneeling position and fell on her ass. Kujisaki sent a scathing look at the former shrine maiden before speaking. Where you've spent your past decades plotting Joragumo's release, I've spent mine preparing for the day she might break out. The first of the two incarnations that charged towards her finally came in range, and she forced her attention back to them. She stretched forth and pointed two fingers at the charging incarnation before swinging down the fingers with a sharp jerk of her wrists. Two thin spikes fell from the sky. One buried itself into the back of the incarnation's knee, forcing it to the floor, while the second buried itself into the joint of the outstretched arm and forced it into the ground. Trapped. The second one jumped over the body of the first in a lunge, and she forced aged and weakened knees to duck under the creature. The moment she tried to get back on her feet, her knees seized as arthritis reared its ugly head. She only had the chance to stare at the recovered incantation, even as it twisted and turned back at her, before a heavy and knotted tree branch slammed into its face. Aiko had a fierce expression on her face as the heavy branch cracked on the armored faceplate of the incarnation. A second later, Kujisaki finally found her feet and forced herself up, palming a small needle from her pocket and slamming it into the disoriented incarnation. It didn't have the length, and they were too close for her cursed energy to generate any real force, so she had to cheat. Curse technique. Hairpin. The following explosion of force pierced the incarnation and sent its broken form flying further into the trees. Sending her attention back to the trapped incarnation, a flex of her will had it dead as well. She forced her eyes to look at Aiko, only to see the younger woman had picked Nobara back up from where she had dropped her, with shaking limbs. How is she do dash? Snap. She blinked, and she was on her knees. Blurry eyes stared at the unconscious forms of Aiko and Nobara in confusion. How? What happened? Tisk. The sound shot through the clearing like a bomb. No. She thought even as she forced her suddenly stiff and rigid neck to turn to the side. Every movement was a struggle till she finally beheld her once more. No. The straw statue fell slowly, like gravity had lost some power over it, even as a pale white hand snuck its way out of it. The remaining people lying in supplication were visibly drained of their last essence at accelerated rates before finally collapsing into bones and withered flesh. No. Kami, please no. She raged, she begged, and she prayed to uncaring gods. Multiple ton chains fell around the doll, broken and crushed. Not again. A pale, bone-white hand emerged first before an inhumanly beautiful body followed. Kujisaki watched with wide eyes as the statuesque figure emerged. Pitch-black hair framing the porcelain features of an oval-shaped face. She had a beautiful little upturned nose, with black eyes and 6 red dots just above her eyes. A kimono lay wrapped around her, just slightly ruffled from her decades-long entrapment and loose around the shoulders, exposing delicate and sensual collarbones and cleavage. She could have been mistaken for beautiful if not for the madness that lay in her eyes. The pressure she carelessly exhibited suppressed everything in her vicinity, sending a flare out in an empty sea and proving she was the one above all. The moon hung low, casting long shadows that crept through the forest. A chilling wind whispered through the desolate and broken trees from the previous battles, and carried with it an eerie silence broken only by distant, haunting echoes. The clouds passing the moon added a spectral glow to the scene, revealing glimpses of forgotten corners and decaying facades. A sense of foreboding settled in the air as if unseen eyes watched from the darkness, and every step she took echoed with the weight of impending doom as Joragumo stepped out of her seal. Her first act was a glance at the kneeling Kimiko. Her second was sending a backhand slap with her dainty hand. A backhand slap that cracked and splintered the old woman's head, sending skull fragments and brains to the floor with the force of a cannon. You took too long, you ugly vapid fool. The voice was in contrast to the words. Her voice had the oily and silky texture a salesman would have done anything to obtain, while the words were as vulgar and rough as any street tough around the corner. The headless form of Kimiko dropped to the floor bonelessly, heedless of the damage she had just received. At least her death was painless, Kujisaki noted even as she tried to stumble and force her way to her feet. 2 decades and you could only barely nudge the doors loose. This is why you were never my favorite. The utterly unfeeling tone of the voice sent shivers down Kujisaki's spine. She knew what was coming next, and like clockwork, the cursed spirit's eyes snapped to her struggling figure and brightened considerably. "My cute little Chio," the cursed spirit called out with a tilt of her head and a smile that was all teeth. Chio. A name that few people dared call her. "What a nice vacation you gave me," the delusional spirit continued, heedless of what she had truly done, or most likely uncaring. Those pitch-black eyes roved around to the fallen forms of Nobara and Aiko and widened considerably. "And you even brought me snacks. How sweet of you." A blink later and Joragumo's kimono-clad form was above them. A pink tongue left her mouth to gently caress her blood-red lips as she reached for the fallen duo. Kujisaki made to move the remaining 2 spikes hovering just above them, even if she knew she was too late. Even if she knew 2 was not nearly enough to face the capricious cursed spirit Kimiko had released in a stupid act of servitude that saw her rewarded with a bashed skull. A slipper-clad foot appeared from nowhere, pressing its soul into the surprised porcelain visage of Joragumo before blasting her back in a pinpoint explosion of force. The cursed spirit was sent back, blowing past the desiccated figures of the villagers and tumbling head over heels into the forest. Kujisaki finally felt the pressure on her lessen enough to force herself up to face the person who saved her grandchild for the second time. The Gojo brat. His long white hair settled around him, just as he dropped into a protective crouch around Nobara and Aiko. Sinister crimson eyes stared into the forest that Joragumo had stumbled into, and Kimiko sent a sharp glance at the eyes. Last she heard, the Gojo brat with the 6 eyes had eerie blue eyes, not red and black eyes that screamed malevolence on an apathetic visage. She had noted it the first time but had ignored it, thinking it was her age obfuscating her sight. Now, this close to the eyes themselves, she knew they were as real as her hands and legs. Since when did the Gojo clan create another monster? She forced her attention away from the child and focused it back on the forest. She would have to reconnect with the jujutsu world if only to avoid surprises like this. That was if they somehow managed to survive this unholy mess. The brat had not moved from his spot above the fallen forms, even as his eyes were focused on the forest. "She's coming," he called out, his voice soft as a child, even with a tone that was emotionless and empty. Kujisaki idly noted how similar he was to Joragumo, with words that never really seemed to match the tone. She focused on the path Joragumo traced into the forest, realizing that for some reason, she could not see the cursed spirit that the kid pointed out with certainty. Ascribing it to a feature of his eyes, she focused her concentration on her 2 remaining spikes instead. The sound of branches cracking and breaking finally got to her, and she turned tired eyes to where Joragumo stepped out from. Even after taking a head-on hit that had trembled the very air they breathed head-on, her porcelain features had shown no sign of damage. Whatever injury she suffered had recovered swiftly, with just barely a dip in her immense cursed energy pool to acknowledge the weight of the strike. A single observatory glance at Joragumo was enough for the child to admit. "I cannot kill her," he noted without any real fear or emotion in his tone. "At least I cannot risk using Amaterasu long enough to burn through her regeneration." She noted the name of the goddess. Was he truly haughty enough to name his curse technique after God? "Can we seal her?" he asked. "She won't fall for the same trick twice," Kujisaki answered, her voice raspy and rough compared to the boy. "Reinforcement." "Maybe," she acknowledged even as Joragumo fully stepped out of the forest, her full attention on the long-haired boy. Kujisaki knew what that look entailed. Hopefully, the monstrous and unfathomable curse energy Joragumo let out was enough to trigger old failsafes the higher-ups at Jujutsu headquarters set up. "What a technique," the cursed spirit called out as she stopped a few meters away from them. "Either Jujutsu sorcerers have suddenly grown stronger in just a couple of decades, or you, my beautiful child." Scarlet lips were glossed over a pink tongue, while her black eyes held a hungry and predatory look. "You're something different." "What do you want?" the kid called out in a detached tone. His stance was loose and flexible as he eased up from his crouch to stand straight. "Buying time?" she thought. "Originally? I just wanted to reclaim what my beautiful Chio kept me away from," the Joragumo said, her tone matching the brat's own even if her features said something different. "Now? I have to admit I'm somewhat curious about you, child. And what beautiful eyes you possess." Joragumo moved with the final word, swinging her arms in a wide arc. For all the years she had known the cursed spirit, she had never actually seen her fight. So what attack would hit from that far? A forceful push to the side sent her crashing to the ground headfirst. She jerked her head up in time to see the brat run forward before jumping. His body twisted mid-air and parallel to the ground as he made a twist mid-air with a sharp jerk of motion before landing in a roll that he smoothly recovered from. What? Was the only thought on her head before the sound of collapsing trees forced her attention to the edges of the clearing. All the trees at the edge of the clearing had been split horizontally at a sharp angle. She had not even seen the attack. The cursed spirit's smile widened at his maneuver. He had only escaped the attack thanks to the perception that came with the 3-tomo form of the Sharingan. The thin and nearly imperceptible thread had snapped out faster than he expected, and this close, the pressure the cursed spirit seemed to exert slowed him. Was this just pure cursed energy, or was it a technique? The way the trees collapsed behind him made him even more certain of dodging the threads and indicated their sharpness. The shock on the older woman's face when he sent her to the ground almost cracked his serene features with a smile. The cursed spirit swung out another arm and he had to refocus to calculate and track the trajectories of the threads. 60 meters away. 5 threads for 5 fingers. Unequal speed is attributed to the length derived per finger. Slower than the first attack due to the already covered distance, giving it less time to gather speed and momentum. The cursed spirit swung her other arm vertically, sending another wave, a slower but not less deadly set of threads coming at him faster than the human eye could see. 45 meters he jumped and spun mid-air over the first set. Twisting his body sideways as soon as he landed, he evaded the third while in continuous motion, and with a flex of cursed energy, he slammed his feet into the earth, sending up cursed energy-reinforced earth that barely diverted the rest by inches. 30 meters in all this. He had never stopped running towards the seemingly unbothered cursed spirit, nor had he slowed down for even a split second. In defiance of the immense pressure the cursed spirit radiated, he was running at her fast enough to make progress. 20 meters. The cursed spirit was a mid to long-range fighter, so all he had to do was get close enough. It had only shown 2 techniques so far, none of which was applicable to a close-quarters engagement. The first was its ability to puppet people, something that was powerful enough to work even while imprisoned in a seal. The second was the thin and nearly invisible threads that were fast enough to cut and sever everything they passed through. 10 meters finally, he got into close combat range when a sharp spider-like limb with a deadly scythe-like pincer slipped out the back of the kimono, aiming for his head. He swiftly dropped to his knees in a heartbeat. His momentum carried him speeding beneath the spider limb. The only victim of the scything limb was his waist-long hair. He slid past the amused cursed spirit before slapping his left palm hard enough to stop his slide. Using his core muscles, he lifted his body with a single hand as a fulcrum and spun mid-air to deliver a devastating blow to its unguarded back. Multiple spider-like limbs suddenly sprung out from its back and stopped his kick dead. So he was wrong about her close combat capabilities. She twisted her neck back to look at him as he recovered to his feet. So feisty, makes me want to eat you up. He ignored the sultry tone and moved closer, throwing a quick punch and kick combo that the spider-like limbs maneuvered and blocked successfully. And what beautiful hair that was, the cursed spirit continued with a surprising but honest sad frown on its face. It lashed out with another spider limb that tore his shoulder open as he barely dodged back. Its hidden spider limbs were faster than its actual body, he noted even as he found his feet. Aura, is my cursed energy getting in your way? The cursed spirit asked with a kind smile. Let me help out a bit there. Then there was nothing. His eyes widened in shock at the seeming impossibility. It had condensed its cursed energy from the previous volcano into something that could barely be called a candle. What the hell was he fighting? He sensed a flare of cursed energy from above, and he jumped even further back out of range. A heartbeat later, 2 spikes came down like the hammer of God, breaking the sound barrier in a solid boom of force before burying themselves into the cursed spirit and pinning it down to the ground in an X shape. Aura, what are you doing, Chio-kun? The cursed spirit called out with a smile as she twisted to face the old woman, heedless of the spike that was embedded halfway into her. Her immense cursed energy immediately cushioned against the damage of the blow and healed her in the same second. His eyes noted barely a dip in her cursed energy. He already knew it would be hard to deal any real blow, considering how fast it healed his enhanced kick to its face. But this was simply something else. Not even Satoru could boast of this much cursed energy, even with the 6 eyes optimizing his control. So this was why they could not kill it the first time. It would be nearly impossible to tire it out and make it exhaust its cursed energy. That left you with a cursed spirit that simply refused to die. With a forceful jerk, It ripped its way out of the spiked implement and started walking towards the older woman, towards Aiko. With an uncharacteristic snarl on his face, heedless to the possible consequences of using his cursed energy with the second stage of his Sharingan, he increased its supply to his eyes, to the intense sensation of his three tomo fusing and reforming into his Mangekyo. The cursed spirit felt a change within him and started to turn back to react to this new variable. But it was never the fastest, and with the increased perception that came with the final stage of the Sharingan, it was even slower to his sight. He slowly closed his left eye, raised his right hand, and let it curl, with 2 fingers straightened. He focused on the technique and felt it blossom. A meteor boom. An explosion overhead. His eyes snapped up, and the technique dissipated before it could even finish forming. Something had hit the barrier and broken through it from outside. Reinforcements? They were greeted by the sight of 2 falling forms. 2 cursed spirits. His eyes enlightened him with unasked for clarity. This fight was about to turn into something else. Something far more brutal than he expected. Aiko. He ignored Juragumo for the first time since he laid scarlet eyes on her and ran instead, coming to a stop where the old woman Kujisaki had found her feet and she stood before the fallen duo of Nobara and Aiko. The curses slammed into the ground with thunderous force, uprooting the few trees that remained standing and imprinting a crater in the ground. What dares intrude on my hunt? Juragumo called out with an annoyed frown on her face for the first time. A gray hand stretched out of the dust that had been thrown up in the fall, and with a lazy wave, the dust was blown away and dispersed, revealing the forms of the 2 cursed spirits. The one that dispersed it was a humanoid cursed spirit, just like Juragumo. Its pale gray figure was covered in a black outfit with a yellow-black spotted cape around its shoulders. Its back was hunched over, and it held its hands over a black cane. It raised its single cycloptic eye to observe them before it finally settled on Juragumo. Its lips slowly spread out in a black-toothed smile. And another one is born, it spoke, with its interest resting solely on its fellow humanoid cursed spirit. What is your name, newborn? It asked in a grandfatherly tone. Even Jiki could see the way Juragumo's eyebrow raised in disbelief at the cursed spirit's patronizing tone. Another special grade. He heard old woman Kujisake call out behind him, with dread deep in her voice. You have to run, kid. Her voice lacked the usual hard tone he had characterized her with. He could almost hear her plead as her voice broke. Take Aiko and Nobara and get out of here now that the barrier is down. He sent a single glance back at her, and she met his scarlet eyes with dread-clouded brown. Newborn. Juragumo asked with a sharp smile as she looked the 2 cursed spirits over. That is no newborn, Jogo, the second cursed spirit called out as it rested a single palm on the shorter and hunched-over curse's shoulder. He said he called out, but it let out ineligible words that managed to translate into something eligible in his head. A technique? The second one was much larger than the first, standing at over 6 feet at least. It was bone white with black marks raking around its form. Its left hand was hidden behind a stitched-over white cloth, while its head was a faceplate with branches for eyes. Ora, even if I was a newborn cursed spirit, has time changed so much that 2 bugs like you would casually wander into the spider's web? Juragumo called out with an insidious tone lacing every word. You would give insult even without knowing our objective. The shorter curse called out in anger. Juragumo gave out an exaggerated sigh before shrugging delicate-looking shoulders. Speak then, let me know if this intrusion is worth my dance with my beautiful white-haired partner. She sent a glance at him that he would have called seductive if it wasn't coming from a centuries-old monster. With a more weary glance at her, the short cursed spirit spoke. I have been gathering up cursed spirits. To change things in this world boring. So you would wage war then, unleashing another night parade. Juragumo interjected in a bored tone. She did not even allow him to finish his sentence. It didn't work the first 2 times it was done. Why should I bother now when the caliber of curses in humans are so much lower? Why should I bother when I could have it all for myself? Jiki ignored the byplay and sent another glance back at old woman Kujisaki. If I could take one down at immense loss to my cursed energy, who would you say is the most dangerous? His words seemed to shake off some of the fear she had, and she gave him a calculating look before answering easily. Juragumo. If she intended, we'd all be dead now. I thought as much. He could not see a certain way of killing Juragumo considering the unfathomable depths of her curse energy. With 2 other special grades as comparison, He knew they were not a match. Not even together. He was not sure even Amaterasu would overcome her regeneration in time. Against her, the fight would boil down to how fast she could regenerate versus how fast Amaterasu can kill her. He did not like their odds of living long enough to celebrate that victory. The other two special grades were different. He could see the limit to their cursed energy. Even with their large reserves, he was certain that killing them wasn't an impossibility. Killing them after what he planned to do was the problem. Yet he didn't have a choice. Twisting his cursed energy into what he wanted, he pressed his two hands together in a tight grip and called out in a whisper. Susanoo. The skeletal spine of the tempestuous god of valor materialized and overlaid over his with a clack of cursed energy. The accompanying ribcage followed, just as the sheer amount of cursed energy he was exhibiting forced Jogo and the other unnamed spirit to jump back. Joragumo turned her head to him. The other special grade curses were long forgotten behind her as she beheld him call God. The spine elongated and formed a plated skull above him, while a clavicle and scapula manifested, with the accompanying 4 skeletal arms growing out with empty palms grasping for something. Joragumo stared in a mixture of rapturous joy and surprise, even as she stretched out a hand as if to touch him from a distance. His cursed energy dipped further. Naked muscles formed and enhanced by cursed energy grew out in a sudden macabre display, spreading over hardened bones and giving bulk to a hollow frame. What are you? Old woman Kujisaki whispered in shock as she watched his Susanoo manifest. The heavy armor of a war-born god manifested, spreading out and covering muscle-clad fingers with a gauntlet formed of cursed energy, before metastasizing to cover the 4-armed form of his Susanoo in protection that rivaled anything a god could fathom. He could feel the pressure build up at the back of his eyes. After his healing under Shoko, he underwent long practices to know his new limits with this new source of energy. The Tengu-fanged mask of his Susanoo snapped and erupted from behind the skull to snap shut above him. In the same instant, the heavy sake bottle that held the Tatsuka sword formed in his secondary right hand, and the mercurial form of the Yata mirror manifested in his primary left hand and gave unrivaled protection to that side. He let out a heavy breath and touched his dry cheeks. There was no bleed-through, so his older body could successfully withstand the strain of the Susanoo. Even if cursed energy was not optimal for its usage. But this was not a complete one. Not a full manifestation of what he could be. He could almost taste it. The complete Susanoo. A feat he could not accomplish in his past life because of his sickly physique. But now, all he had to do was push for it a bit. He shook off the temptation easily and focused his gaze on the main threat. What is this child? Joragumo called out with rapturous glee. What have you brought me? He stared back at her and replied to her. Your end. Sword of Tatsuka, the liquid and ethereal form of the snake-cutting sword, sprang out of the sake jar at the call of its name. It molded itself to fit the empty primary right hand of the Susanoo. Impossible. That blade has been lost for multiple millennia, Joragumo said even as she took a step back for the first time. Glee and fear fought for supremacy on her face. He swung low. That single swing cleaved through the air. The infinitely razor-sharp blade cut in a wide arc, slicing effortlessly through trees and vegetation. The forest trembled as the force of the blow created a shockwave, causing the destruction to ripple through the forest as nature succumbed to the power of the sword. A heartbeat later, there was an entire section of the forest that was wiped clean as well as a mountain range that was split in half horizontally. He looked down at the split and surging torso of the cursed spirit, Joragumo, even as she stared back at him. Her composure was completely broken. Black eyes rolled in her sockets as her facial expression finally settled on one emotion. Fear. This is not the end, he promised her. For it truly wasn't. Her hands quickly slapped together as her unfathomable cursed energy exploded out in a wave of force. Her lost lower half started to grow back out. Slower than usual as residuals of the blade of Tatsuka clung to her frame. But that was not her focus, he realized with trepidation, just a side effect. With a twist of her hand, she locked her fingers and spread them outward. Palms snapping out facing him. The hand sign formed a complicated spiderweb. Domain Expa. He reversed the blade and plunged it down tip first, burying it in her torso in one sharp movement. The red dots that lay above her brows slowly forced themselves open to reveal pitch-black orbs that closed back a second later as the essence of her being was drawn into the ethereal sword. Ha! She barked out in laughter. The fear that was on her face dispersed into a soft smile. You beautiful and blessed thing. I'll be watching you grow." With those last words, she was sucked completely into the sake jar. A stab of pain came a second later, and he let go of the technique. The armor-clad form of the Susanoo slowly lost its heavy god-forged armor as his cursed energy dip stagnated. The heavy armor dissipated, followed slowly by the muscle deterioration and the skeleto, a blur, and the one-eyed figure of the other special grade was in front of him with his palms stretched and a grim look on his face. Cursed technique, disaster flames. The sudden point-blank explosion of fire and energy hit him but was blocked and dispersed alongside the weakened rib cage of his Susanoo. The following shockwave blew him out of the Susanoo. With a simple act of skill, he forced his body to flip mid-air and land feet first before skidding the rest of the way back. "You are no ordinary human. I don't know what you are." The cursed spirit walked forward with a frown on its face. "But I know I can't let you live. Not if we want a world where cursed spirits reign supreme." He ignored the words. It was supposed to be dead. That was what the mountain-cleaving slash was truly for. His eyes spotted a weird seed-like structure that emerged from the ground with an opening in front. The other cursed spirit was still inside with its single arm pressed elbow-deep into the structure. They went underground then. With that acknowledgement, he straightened up to his feet and cracked his neck to the side. 1 down, 2 to go. The volcano head cursed spirit formed a hand seal and 4 insect-like miniature curses with red-colored butts and sharp forward-facing stingers sprang out from the top of his head and formed around him. They looked like an unholy mixture of a beetle, a dragonfly, and a mosquito. Cursed technique, ember insects, they shot forward like supercharged arrows, and he slammed his foot into the ground in response. The upturned rocks rocketed into the pathway of the miniature cursed spirit, and everything went up in an explosion of fire. Jiki planted his feet into the ground before blurring forward and into the flames. With a sudden explosion of force, he sped through before the cursed fires could burn him and came out of the other end with a hand cocked back to the surprised face of the cursed spirit. He snapped his fingers together, locking them in a knife shape, before plunging them deep into the cycloptic eyes of the cursed spirit. HHH! With a piercing cry of pain, the cursed spirit lashed out blindly with a fire-covered arm that Jiki diverted upward before retaliating with a kick to the side that sent the cursed spirit back. Jiki braced himself and made to follow before giant roots burst out of the ground like spears, aimed at his vital organs and forcing him to backtrack. He moved his scarlet eyes to the source of the roots. The other special grade. For some reason, it just stayed in the structure and watched them fight. Its only interruption so far had been this spear of roots. "You bastard." He looked up in time to dodge an axe kick that planted into the ground hard enough to crater it. He skipped to the side, predicting another blow, only for the cursed spirit to let out a black-toothed smile. Its cycloptic eyes had recovered, even if they had a tinge of red at the edges. Jiki looked down at where he was about to land and his eyes pierced through the group to see the trap. There was a volcano-like protrusion slowly forming underground and forcing its way out. He skipped lightly on the ground before jumping further back. A split second later it erupted. The explosion of fire blocked his vision for a second, and the curse burst out of the fire to bury a fire-clad fist that folded him over. It was learning from him. He realized with a raised brow. The following blow was diverted to the side by his forearm even as he dodged another disaster fire strike. The cursed spirit's technique made him realize something he had thought he lost in his rebirth. Ever since he regained his memories, he had behaved like he was still in the elemental nations. He had treated cursed energy purely like chakra for so long, trying to mold it into his previous life's techniques. While his method had proven applicable in some, like reinforcement and his activation of the Sharingan, it had proven borderline impossible, as indicated by his struggle with Genjutsu and his inability to perform a single ninjutsu. Another straight palm at his head was deflected, and a second later the heat of intense fire blasting out of the palm dried the sweat that had formed on his face. Yet he kept his unblinking eyes on the cursed spirit. He watched the way its cursed energy ebbed and flowed even without any hand signs. Ducking under a spinning kick, he lashed out with his leg to deflect the second kick downwards. With his feet stomping down hard on the cursed spirit's leg, the technique it had sent down the leg blasted out fire from its feet, with his own feet pressing down on the cursed spirits. Innate techniques were not often created manually after all. He had known that even with the bare-bones knowledge the clan had fed him in preparation for Jujutsu High, they were already carved into the brain and were simply triggered in the same way the knowledge of each person's Mangekyo was carved into the brain and soul of every Uchiha that unlocked it. The cursed spirit was forced to bear the brunt of the technique's blowback, as Jiki jumped back a heartbeat later as the ground within 10 feet erupted from the inverse volcanic explosion of the technique. But unlike Limitless, fire was not just a technique. It was a naturally occurring phenomenon. There was still a process it went through. A process the cursed technique followed. A process he was deeply familiar with. Force. Pressure. Intent. All he had to do was go back to the roots of ninjutsu before it was bastardized and weaponized by the first Uchiha. All he had to do was go back to the concept of ninshu. Ninshu was originally created to give people a better understanding of chakra, themselves, and other people. The cursed spirit knowingly or unknowingly made use of that same principle. Using cursed energy, it instinctively applied ninshu and forged an intrinsic connection between itself and the concept of fire that created it. Jiki could feel his Sharingan spinning wildly in his sockets as he tried to pick up the cursed spirit in the ash and smoke that surrounded him. He was only half present in this fight, as the consuming elation of enlightenment felt like it was burning a scorched pathway through his brain. The sudden flying kick from his left almost caught him off guard, but he spun on the spot and dodged the kick by a hair's breadth, before sending out a knee that was countered with a palm strike mid-air. A palm strike that scorched the cloth and skin off his knee. Yet the force of the knee strike was enough to send the cursed spirit rocketing into the smoke. Even the sensation of fire burning his skin fueled his enlightenment. To stay still in combat was to die. So he moved. Instead of connecting to people, the cursed spirit held tight to the concept of fire. Fire was both a primal force and transformative energy. Fire was hungry, consuming, and purifying. Fire was the driving force of the cycle of destruction and rebirth. Fire was also the easiest element to connect to as it reached for you just as much as you reached for it. Hoping to scorch you just as much as you hoped to wield it to your ends. Like all Uchiha, he knew fire. He met the cursed spirit halfway as they clashed once more. A human fist found its way buried into the gray-white throat of the cursed inhuman facsimile of flesh. Just as the ground Jiki stood on erupted, flames blasted out, an attack he dodged easily. It was losing its previous calm edge and growing feral. Had it truly never faced a real opponent? Fire. Immolation. Combustion. All it needed was the spark to bring it to life. With that thought in mind, Jiki kicked the cursed spirit back to create distance and raised up a trembling hand before stilling it with a force of will. He closed his eyes as he formed a single-hand tiger seal. A hand sign to mold his cursed energy into a facsimile of what he wanted, the knowledge of how to bring the technique to work employing combustion, and finally, the intent to burn. The coming-of-age technique came to him with clarity. Even with his eyes closed, he could pick up on the way the cursed spirit ran through the smoke and waited for it. The moment it was in front of him, he snapped his eyes open and activated the technique with a flex of will. Curse technique, fire style, great fireball. The sudden explosion of fire and light brought the world into startling clarity as the technique bloomed in front of him. The cyclopean red-eyed visage of the cursed spirit widened in shock, even as it spread out a hand towards the great fireball. The detonation of the technique destroyed everything in front of him. Combustion even as the fire spread outward, seeking what to further burn and destroy by immolation. He let out a shaky breath as his body trembled from the stress he had put it through. Finally, the smoke cleared off, and he could see his opponent once more. The cursed spirit was unsurprisingly alive. He noted with a soft chuckle. Its right hand has been reduced to nothing. Its clothes had been burnt, its gray flesh was cracked and broken. Yet it still stood. How? It asked Jiki, even as its voice cracked. The great fireball was not the greatest fire-style technique, but still it should have been dead after taking it headfirst, but somehow it had survived even that. With a tilt of his head, Jiki noted that it must have had some innate resistance to fire. Yet right now, its cursed energy was exhausted and as low as his. It took a wide-eyed threatening step towards him as the cracked flesh fell off and its skin regenerated slowly. Jiki's ears picked up the sudden displacement of air from behind, and his soft smile widened into a sharp and uncharacteristic grin, even as the cursed spirit looked behind him with a frown. He could feel eyes trail his injuries from behind before a soft, familiar voice called out in the wake of the displacement. Its usually jovial tone had the intensity of cold death, and for the first time, Jiki felt like he was not alone again. I'll kill you. He sent searching eyes back, and once more malevolent scarlet eyes locked into eerie blue. Satoru walked up to him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? He gave a shrug and a smile before replying, a bit burnt, bruised and cut, but majorly exhausted. And that was the truth. He was no longer the 6-year-old kid who struggled to even survive against the sorcerer killer. None of the injuries he had gotten so far were life-threatening. No real broken bones, and he made sure he was never slow enough to take Jogo's disaster flames head-on. The only real injury he noted was the laceration from his left chest to his shoulder. He glanced at it. Throughout the fight, he had instinctively held the muscle tight in a feat of long-practiced control. Yet, it still bled freely. His only notable injury was a glancing blow from an amused Jorogumo. That she also had access to a domain just made it that much more insidious. This was his second foe that had not taken him seriously, and they had paid the price for it. They had ignored the threat he could pose simply because of his age. In his previous life, where children as young as 6 could be sent to the war front, nobody would have dared make that mistake. But this world was soft. Only 2 world wars in a century, compared to the 4 they had in less than 50 years. Yet wasn't this exactly what he had hoped to build? He shook his head, breaking off the wild tangent his mind had begun to follow, daring to dredge up past hopes and dreams. Satoru replied to him with a nod before turning his attention back to the regenerated curse. An unregistered special grade? Who are you? The curse asked while turning the screw at the side of its head. Anger and annoyance at being ignored? Jiki noted it down as an emotional tick. This time a smile crept up on Satoru's face, and his normal boisterous exterior appeared once more but tinged with something dark. Something malicious. I'm the strongest, he stated with all the certainty of a man that had known his fate from the moment he was born. A man whose birth shifted the axis on which this world spun. The cursed spirit gave him a confused look even as Satoru continued before turning his eyes to where the giant straw figure used to rest. And no, you were not the one to actually stress my cute little Jiki-kun after all. Satoru gave him a very obvious once-over before continuing. You're weak. Satoru turned away from the surprised and rapidly boiling visage of the cursed spirit. He gave a brief look at the second curse that hadn't moved an inch, at the open-mouthed form of Granny Kujisaki, and at the wide-eyed forms of Aiko and Nobara. When had they woken up? He questioned idly. He had been so focused on the threats before him that he had missed their recovery. It was another special grade. Jiki gave out another shrug. A shrug that stretched his wounded shoulder, he realized with a wince. Special grade cursed spirit, Jorogumo? Satoru asked with a raised brow. Considering the speed Satoru got here with, and taking alongside the fact he didn't come over with the eye wrap on, Satoru most likely had an idea of what he was coming to face. So Jiki nodded in reply. Mao, I was really gearing up to face her, you know, Satoru continued with an exaggerated pout. Completely unbothered about the cursed spirit that was rapidly boiling just as its diminished cursed energy seemed to rapidly increase. The higher-ups already had their panties in a bind. After all, her cursed energy could be felt back at Jujutsu High all the way from here. Can you believe the moment she was released, the number of cursed spirits in Japan alone nearly multiplied? Really? He asked in surprise. Really? Satoru continued with an exaggerated hand movement depicting the way the cursed energy flowed out. How come I didn't see a single cursed spirit in the village? Because I killed them all before they managed to feed off her cursed energy, brat, the rough voice of old woman Kujisaki called out, drawing their attention back to her. Anyway, she was a registered special grade and we had some idea of her capabilities, so where is she right now? Satoru finally continued. I sealed her, Jiki answered plainly, stifling the desire to shrug. You seal-curse technique, disaster flames. Satoru ducked and spun on the spot, like he had been waiting for the moment for days. Dodging the overstretched gray hand before burying 2 fingers deep into the wide-eyed cursed spirit's chest. The sheer speed of the moment made it certain that Jiki was the only one who saw what actually happened. Satoru whispered a sentence. His previous jovial tone drained to nothing, and his soft voice carried the cold chill of the dead. Cursed technique reversal, red. The explosive output of the reverse curse technique activating point-blank in front of the special grade and burnt a hole through it. A hole that extended outwards to carve a new pathway into the forest. The shockwave of force came next. It exploded and blew everything in the surroundings away. With a flex of his cursed energy, Jiki anchored himself to the ground and kept his footing before raising a hand to block out the dust. When he raised his head once more, the special grade was nowhere to be seen. But Satoru was still looking down the pathway his reverse curse technique had carved through the forest. Waving off the dust, he looked to Satoru and asked, "Still alive?" Surprisingly, Satoru admitted with a curious tilt of his head. "I guess it's not a special grade for nothing." The flare of cursed energy that indicated the activation of a technique drew his eyes to where the seemingly docile special grade curse was. It had finally decided to move then? He could not hear the words this far away, but their effects were clear. Within the entire clearing, a wide flower bed suddenly grew out. The soft sound of summer breeze blowing through the flowers, the sweet smell of pollinated flowers, and the directed disruption of his cursed energy made the sensation disappear just as fast as it came. Genjutsu? Jiki realized with wide eyes. And one that was insidious enough to get past a sorcerer's innate resistance to it. How? 2 lifetimes of well-honed instincts screamed danger, so he turned. His Sharingan enhanced his perception, slowing the world down for him alone. 5 cursed energy-enhanced roots speared forward. He ducked under his, and Satoru recovered fast enough to slap the one that came for him to the side. The remaining 3 overshot and went behind them. Behind them. He spun around, dread in his bones and his eyes shifting into their Mangekyo form. Heedless of the risk, as Amaterasu, the heavenly illumination of a god, sprang out and destroyed 1 root. Ignoring the spike of pain that came with the usage, he turned immediately, and the next second the black fire sprang up on another root, but even with that, he was still too slow. Too slow to stop the last root. The last root heading for Nobara. Old woman Kujisaki sent trembling knees up and stepped in the way. A valiant effort to save her grandchild. A wasted effort. It speared through the weakened frame of the elderly woman, bursting out her back with her internal organs following before its sharp end buried itself into the unmoving girl. He blinked away the prediction. Spears of roots shot out from where the cursed spirit was standing. 5 cursed energy-enhanced spiked stakes for the 5 people alive in the clearing. His cursed energy was running low, but he still had enough in him to try it. Locking his 10 fingers together, he raised up the 2 index fingers to his lips, before twisting his cursed energy into what he wanted and breathing out. Cursed technique, fire-style great flame technique. He expelled a large stream of flames from his mouth that progressively widened as it shot forward like a long-range portable flamethrower. Fire against wood was only ever going to have one result. The spreading barrier of cursed energy-derived flames scorched and burnt down the 5 roots with an unmatched hunger before they could gather up speed and time to become the threat he saw. His cursed energy ran dry a few seconds later, and he was forced to stop and hunch over to cough out the smoke that had managed to form in his lungs. Using a B-rank fire-style jutsu barely 10 minutes after he managed to re-engineer ninjutsu on this world was not the smartest thing. He had to admit, even as he felt Satoru's hand on his back, slapping it gently. He looked up to see Satoru staring at him with an increasingly bright smile. "You've discovered your innate technique," Satoru exclaimed. All the concern about his previously injured state was gone in the heat of the moment. The anger and curiosity at the special grade cursed spirit transformed into joy. This was the Satoru he was more familiar with. "Not exactly," Jiki finally spoke as he managed to clear his lungs. To the raised questioning brow of Satoru. "I copied the cursed spirit's technique." "An innate technique that copies other techniques?" Satoru asked, with a hand on his chin. The 2 special grade cursed spirits were forgotten behind him. Jiki was not certain it was that either. The way he molded his cursed energy was something different from just copying a technique. He had a feeling this was replicable. It won't be easy, but he knew it was possible. But the concept of ninjutsu or its originator ninshu was not known nor common here. Explaining it would be time-consuming, and they didn't have the time for it. Plus, he knew how worried Satoru had been about his lack of innate curse technique. So he shrugged in response, suppressing the wince that shot through him. "What about the curses?" he asked as he sent out searching eyes. "They've been gone for a while," Satoru answered as he walked off to see Aiko, Nobara, and old woman Kujisaki. 2 special grade curses teaming up and working together is rare, but not exactly unheard of. They were here to recruit Joragumo. "Huh." That stopped Satoru short. "Really?" "Really," Jiki answered. "Ha. That won't have gone well for them." Joragumo was a noted cannibal. She didn't exactly care where she got the cursed energy from. That was one of the reasons she was so feared in the Heian era. In other notes, Satoru looked back at him as he continued walking. The higher-ups are going to want to see you. This is not just about you being a prodigy. You managed to seal a centuries-old cursed spirit. What should I expect? A marriage contract at least. Old woman Kujisaki broke into the conversation once more as they neared, even if her focus was on pressing her palm on both Aiko's and Nobara's heads. The old woman knew reverse curse healing? So why didn't the spiteful bag of anger and annoyance heal the gash she tore into him? Then her words clicked again in his head. A marriage contract? He asked with a barely notable tremble in his voice that was definitely caused by the smoke that got into his lungs. Mao, don't mind her. This is not the Meiji period. Forceful arranged marriage is no longer all that common. Jiki's hopes were raised a bit before the older woman opened her mouth once more. You forget they also tried to marry you off in a stupid attempt to artificially breed new six-eyed brats, and only the fact that you were the next clan head stopped that in its tracks. Satoru scratched his head in embarrassment. It's all in the past anyway. Don't worry about it. For the first time, Satoru's words didn't bring him any comfort. This is the first official meeting in regard to the ungraded jujutsu sorcerer, Gojo Jiki. Jiki stood in between 6 equally spaced traditional wooden slides. Behind them were the moving cogs and wheels of the jujutsu world. The people that decided who lived and who died in this world. He stood easily, giving a lazy look to the seal-etched wooden slides. Not even his eyes could peer through them. Here he was wasting time instead of continuing his vacation in Aiko's village now that it had been cleansed. Satoru better keep to his word and teleport him back after this. Needing a distraction, he turned his attention to his clothes. The white kimono and matching black half-hand hayori he wore over it fit him snugly. He had to admit, the more traditional wear for some reason reminded him of older times. This was reinforced by the scene. This was not the first time he was meeting a group of higher-ups in a clandestine location. Exorcised his first curse at age 6, the first voice called out. Unlocked a mutation of the 6 eyes, another one acknowledged. Fought and survived the hyperlethal class, sorcerer killer, another one added. Hyperlethal? Did they just make up a new classification for a single man? He could not say why they didn't just classify him as special grade. But considering the prejudice of the higher-ups, he would guess it was the man's lack of cursed energy. It must have hurt them to even admit that he was a threat to the vast majority of them. Committed an unsanctioned investigation on the registered special grade spirit, Juragumo, another one called out. This time hostility laced this person's tone, and Jiki raised an unimpressed brow at it. Accomplice in the death of over 30 men and women, another voice continued, tone cold and unfeeling. Fought against the special grade curse, Juragumo, and sealed her, this one was more approving. Allegedly. The hostile voice added. He let out a sigh that drew all attention to him. You've heard of her, you've felt her cursed energy, tasted the sheer malice and desire she held in her frame, even from afar while clad in your protection. If she was roaming about Japan, we wouldn't be here talking about me, he stated for the first time. His tone was curt and non-argumentative, simply factual. Disrespectful. Truly a gojo, the hostile voice finally said after a short 5-second break where they all shuffled behind their barriers. He guessed not even their overinflated sense of worth and pride could blind them to what he had done. With the aid of the mutated 6 eyes, with noted abilities widely varying from the original 6 eyes, the cold and detached voice continued from where they stopped. Jiki stood still and uncaring. He had made his point. He might not care for being psychoanalyzed to his face, but he wouldn't allow them to discredit him for no reason. According to the multiple eyewitness reports, names were mentioned with each activation of the techniques. Divine names. Deific names. Gods, a new voice called out in amusement. Heretical. The hostile voice spoke up once more, glee lacing the tone. Amaterasu, an unquenching black fire, one noted. Susanoo, a faux manifestation of a god, another one noted. Yet, the names have been backed up by the ability. And we all felt it, didn't we? The first voice finally spoke up again. Once more, they were quiet. But this time, it lasted longer, and it piqued his curiosity. What exactly had they felt? Sealed the special grade curse, Juragumo, with the blade of Tatsuka. A deific grade weapon that had been lost for almost 2 millennia, the cold voice noted once more. The voice was clinical, neither approving like the first nor truly hostile like the fourth. It just made statements. But this time, it held something like interest in its tone. How did this come to be? He shrugged in reply. This had gotten tedious again, but he was not one to break formality. I don't know, he said, the truth and a lie. He did not know how they lost their own Tatsuka no Tsurugi, but his own was brought along from another life, where he challenged its protector, the chief summons of the elusive bearded dragons, in a bid to counter what Orochimaru had done to his little brother. Lie, one voice noted. True, another one countered. I tire of this, a new voice spoke up, bearing the weight of age in its tone, the grinding of millennia. Verdict? It asked. All were silent for 10 long minutes while he stood like a statue. Special grade status approved, the hostile voice finally announced for the group, with gritted teeth that he could hear even from behind its barrier. Special grade sorcerer Gojo Jiki, you're hereby mandated to join one of the jujutsu schools in Japan here. Absence or reneging on this is not advised, the aged voice spoke up once more. I officially welcome you to the world of jujutsu, child. May you be one of the pillars that hold it up high. He stepped out of the oppressive room with an easy cadence in his pace. Despite how annoying he had found the atmosphere, it was something he was admittedly used to. Stoicism born of discipline had led him through multiple such meetings. Ignoring the unfamiliar way the more traditional Heiori flowed with his stride, he turned the corner to see the waiting forms of Satoru, Yutaheim, Mei, and an unfamiliar man bearing blonde hair and green eyes with something as rare as a pure white stallion running about metropolitan Tokyo, a thick, heavy beard. The four of them were seated on 2 long benches in the traditionally styled hallway, with the benches resting on both sides. He doubled his pace and strode to meet them. He came to an easy stop before a grinning Satoru and returned his older cousin's grin with a softer smile. How was it? Satoru asked after a quick ruffle of his hair as soon as he sat down beside him. He waved the handoff and moved to his seat before replying. More exhausting than facing the sorcerer killer. Only you would say that. Mei cut in with a smile. He looked at her again and had to wonder about her age. Even 7 years after the first time he met her, she hadn't aged a day physically. Despite the woman's flirtatious nature and strange interest in him, he had never given her much thought. Now gray eyes picked up the way her clothes hung tightly to her physique, highlighting her figure in a way that drew his eyes like nothing else did. A thick thigh lay over the other as she sat in a lounging posture opposite him with all the grace of a curious cat. She eyed him back with her single exposed eye and a growing smile before he forced his eyes away and shrugged off the unfamiliar feeling, purposely ignoring the way her eyes lit up. It brought to mind memories of Izumi. Memories he had been suppressing with all he had for as long as he could remember. But puberty had a way of shaking things loose. He had lost control over himself more times in the past few months than he had done in the past 7 years. It was only the conviction formed of another lifetime of war that helped him focus as much as he had. Finally designated me a grade. Jiki spoke up again in an attempt to distract himself even as he moved his eyes from Mei to the blonde-haired foreigner. Oh, they did? Any guess at what it is? Satoru replied with glee while rubbing his hands together with a mischievous smile. Nobody is stupid enough to take you up on that bet, Satoru. Even if the other clans tried to hinder his promotion in fear of the Gojo accumulating more power, it would be impossible to shackle Jiki. Not after the Joragumo incident. Mei replied with a smile. Another special grade then? The man finally spoke up. His voice was rough, and his Japanese was accented with something rougher. Yes, Jiki replied with an easy nod as he focused completely on the stranger. His gray eyes transitioned smoothly into the 3-tomo form of the Sharingan, and the man flinched for a split second, so fast it would have been missed by almost any other person. But he was not any other person, was he? The man had little curse energy, at least with respect to the monsters like Satoru and Mei. If Jiki was going to guess, he would have pegged him for a grade 2 or 3 sorcerer. The man stayed silent for a second before he introduced himself. The name is Ivanov Boris. The man started, and it took him a split second to place the name. He was only vaguely familiar with the world outside Japan, but the guttural tone and intonation cleared whatever doubt he had. The man was Russian. A nation, if his borderline photogenic memory was correct, one that was just as treacherous as the land of snow. What sort of monsters would such lands create? If you've been classified as a special grade, then my coming here was somewhat of a waste, the man admitted with a frown. Oh. My original intention was to invite you to our prestigious school of Zagavori. But if you've managed to attain the special grade rank already, I don't think they will be letting you go anytime soon. Jiki gave a nod of acknowledgement. He had never given much thought to how sorcery worked outside Japan. He remembered Satoru saying sorcerers and cursed spirits were more common and stronger in Japan than in other countries, but never the why. Apologies, but I was mandated to attend a school in Japan here. I'm guessing that's why you guys are here. He looked at the smirking form of Mei Mei and the smiling and straight-backed form of Yutaheim. Somewhat, Mei Mei agreed easily. You're a special grade now. The fourth and youngest special grade in recent history, achieving the rank even faster than Satoru. The higher-ups would do anything to have you under their thumb, which leads us here. Gakuganji sent Yutaheim ahead to invite you to Kyoto Jujutsu High, which is the sister school to the one in Tokyo here. Yutaheim smoothly continued from where Mei Mei stopped. It is also the most prestigious school in Japan, sitting on the foundational, sacred, and blessed land of Kyoto. I'm sure a child of your talents would be happy to be fostered in the best school in the world. Jiki sent searching eyes to the side and witnessed the wide grin that was plastered on Satoru's face. Mao Mao, are you really trying to steal my cute little Jiki-kun from right under my nose? Of course we are, Mei Mei agreed easily with an even larger smirk to match Satoru's grin. The higher-ups promised at least 5 million yen if I managed to convince him over. Anything to get him away from your horrible influence. So what do you say, Jiki-kun? I don't care, he answered without much thought and to the surprised glance from the three people present. Yet somehow Satoru's grin got even wider. Of course, Satoru was the only one here with an actual idea of his thought process, wasn't he? I'm still 14 for a few months, which means I have till I'm 15 to make a real choice, he added as he transitioned to his feet. Till then. He let out a shrug. I plan on continuing my vacation. He finished with a pointed stare at Satoru that was answered with a laugh. A split second later he felt space-time twist around him as Satoru clasped his hands together, and then he was gone. Do you think he's coming back? She asked big sister Aiko even as she wrung her hands nervously on the walk to Fumi's place. Soon, I hope, Aiko replied to her with a basket in hand and a soft smile for her. The past few days had been strange. Her grandmother had always told her vague stories of past eras and her role in taking over when she was gone. Yet the scale of what had happened was not something she had ever considered possible. Even a glance around showed how much the village had changed. How much the landscape had shifted and rearranged because of him. The mountain range that had been there for centuries before she was born had been cut off mid-height in a feat that she had not thought possible. She remembered the thrill of the moment. The intense sensation of fear and rapturous joy she had felt the moment she woke up. The moment she heard him call God. The moment he sundered and rearranged the world around her village, just because he could. She tried her best to ignore the empty houses they walked past. She had seen the remains of the denizens before the fight had gotten so chaotic. The mummified and desiccated forms still kept her up at night sometimes. Jujutsu. She had asked her grandmother about learning more, with motivation stemming from what she had experienced. Her grandmother's only reply was for her to wait till Jujutsu High. She forcefully shifted her thoughts back to better things. Like Jiki, she admitted it with a blush on her face that was thankfully hidden by her hairbangs. He had looked barely older than her when they first met. His white locks framed a soft face with sad gray eyes. Features that made him seem so fragile. Trying to reconcile the image with a short-haired, intense teen that cut a mountain range in half was almost ridiculous. Maybe he would teach her to do the same? Speak of the devil, and there he was, she realized with an even brighter blush. He walked down the road giving a lazy and apathetic glance at the surrounding empty houses before sighting them. Even this far off, she could sense something off about him. Something different. Especially now that she had seen beyond the facade that was his bored mask. Those lazy glances were his eyes picking up on almost everything and categorizing it, she realized with hindsight. He was dressed in a white yukata and a black one-handed haori over it, with geta sandals on his feet. It was a very distinct image from the sweatshirt and shorts-clad teen that walked into the village a week ago. Jiki. She called out in a wave before he got to them. How've you been, Nobara? He asked with a smile that sent her flustering again, which forced Aiko to answer for her. God damn it. She was Nobara Kujisaki. Lion of the village and granddaughter of the old terror, she was never shy. We've been helping the village recover and settle back into the way things used to be over the past 2 days you've been away. Considering they were aware of Jorogumo, it has not been all that difficult, although Aiko gave a look at the empty houses before continuing. It has not been the easiest either. We've lost some people, and scars like that don't come off quickly. Jiki answered with a subdued nod as he stared at the houses with an empty expression that reeked of apathy. But this close to him, she could see the way his hand, covered by the black Hayori, was clenched tight. Where did you go? She finally found her words and butted into the conversation, changing the gloomy topic. Oh, I was summoned by the higher-ups about Jorogumo's sealing. Even the sheer mention of her name sent chills down Nobara's spine, and she only had bare memories of the woman. Jorogumo. A blurry figure that faced the manifestation of a god head-on without fear. That is all she managed to piece together days later. What about you? Seems like I caught you guys halfway to somewhere. We're visiting Fumi, Nobara replied. She had finally found her voice back, she realized in that moment. And Aiko had kept quiet to allow her to lead the conversation this time. Mind if I walk with you? Sure, she agreed easily, even as she started telling him about everything he had missed over the last 2 days. She could feel his cursed energy the moment he appeared in the town. That dense, borderline malevolent cursed energy. It was not any bigger than it originally was, even if it was already above average. No, where it differed was the texture of his cursed energy. If cursed energy was the combined negative feelings found in humans, his own seemed otherworldly and drenched in so much blood and regret. The texture of cursed energy you would find on a man 6 times his age with enough regrets to drown the world. The sheer maliciousness of it would have put her off if she didn't know the boy himself. That was honestly the real reason why she had attacked him the moment she saw him the first time. Her clear dislike of his clan aside. He suddenly disengaged from walking with Nobara and Aiko, and she had a feeling she knew why he had suddenly changed direction and started heading her way. Ruminating back on his cursed energy, there was something insidious beneath his usual cursed energy. A touch of something even more malevolent swimming beneath his cursed energy. Like a shark in a pool of blood, ever hungry and yet surrounded by enough. She supposed it had something to do with how he sealed Jorogumo. So she busied herself with preparing tea for 2 and her signature cookies, while still making sure his tea was bitter, without milk or sugar. It won't do for the spiteful old woman character she loved so much to be broken by a sweet tea. Her cackling was interrupted by a knock on the door, so she straightened up, schooled her visage into its perpetually angry mask, and picked up her cane. The door was opened, and the now short-haired brat greeted her with a polite half-bow. Old hag. Monstrous brat. With the formalities done with, she led him back to the kitchen, where their waiting cup of tea sat. He dragged out her chair, and she sat gently before he slid it back and turned to his own seat. He sat down with a grace that she envied, but for people like them, getting old was fortunate enough already, so she was used to the brief bout of that particular emotion. He sat and took a sip of his tea, swallowing the no doubt bitter tea without even a twitch on his regular placid visage. TCH, the unflappable bastard. Her attempt at needling him was seemingly a waste. Oh well, she had the whole of his vacation to continue their fun game. I'm guessing you came here to ask about your mother, she started, the question rhetorical. How did you know? It wasn't that hard to figure out. She left here with Aiko in her hands, and you come back, hand in hand with Aiko. More importantly, you look so much like her. The kid turned his eyes to his tea. Was that a crack in his facade? Even if it was, she couldn't find it in her to wrench that particular one open. So she continued talking. She was a fair one, the lass was. Old woman Kujisaki reminisced about the woman with a mixture of a frown and smile. Soft features like yours, with the matching little stress marks. The major difference between you two was her bright smiles. But growing up in a clan like the Gojo, I guess she was the exception. I'm not certain about her technique, but I know it had something to do with sealing curses before transforming them into something else. She came here with the old clan head while chasing after it. She knew about the special grade cursed spirit, he asked. Of course she did. Despite the higher-ups' effort to contain and destroy news about her, Jorogumo was a notable figure in the Hein era and just before her sealing. So what happened? The kid asked at the edge of his seat. What happened to Gojo Mikoto here? This time she released a tired sigh in response to the question. It was one of those old memories she preferred being stuck in the back of her mind. At times like this, she cursed her imminent dementia for not taking away the harder memories. Kimiko tricked them. I don't know the details, as I was too late by then. What I do know is that after they had partially unsealed her and realized what they had done, your mother did something to reseal the cursed spirit. Something she never recovered from. A few months later, I heard she died giving birth to a child. I had not given it much thought other than mourning her death. For her child to come back and seal Joragumo, seemingly with a permanent measure, fate sure has a sense of humor. She allowed a bitter laugh to slip out and watched the kid blink back wet eyes. Fate definitely had a morbid sense of humor, she decided, forcing herself to her feet and taking the used cups with her, giving the kid some alone time. In his opinion, his dislike for sorcery and the supernatural in general was very valid. Some people's first experience with curses and jujutsu originally starts in a classroom, if he had to guess. His first real experience with one started with what he learned later down the line was a grade 1 curse spirit. "Where are you?" The oscillating childlike voice called out, even as the heavy thud of meat and bone colliding with a wall sounded out above him. He sent searching eyes up, only to watch as the body slowly slid down from where it had impacted. The monster had flung the body with so much force that the face was a mess of bone and flesh, with an eye that fell and rolled to where he was hiding. A familiar brown eye. He lay crouched on the floor with his palm tight around his mouth, strangling his screams shut. Searching eyes were drawn back to the body as it continued its slow slide down before settling on the ground. The man, at least he thought it was a man, was dressed in a three-piece black suit that had not survived its encounter with the multi-headed monstrosity. Sunlight flashed in from the window, exposing a gold and diamond ring band on the man's finger. A ring bearing the kanji for king. So that was where Boss Eiji ended up. Fitting for a man who grew his reputation from bashing in people's heads. The irony of it all. "I told you to leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone. Why didn't you?" The monster continued the ghastly crunching of its monstrous limb slamming into another unfortunate person's chest. This was his fault. The thought almost made a deranged laugh squeezed past his lips. He was the one who had suggested they sweat the man out, instead of the regular Yakuza method of beating him up till he finally paid up his debt. He was a once-in-a-lifetime genius, the intellectual brainpiece that was the brawn of their organization. He had finished high school by 12 years old and college by 16. So why hadn't he listened to his instincts' warnings when he felt a dark miasma building up in the man? He had lived so long ignoring the weird quirks and little monsters he had seen hanging off people's shoulders for so long. He had almost started to believe it was a selective hallucination. Boom, boom, boom. Gunshots, he thought with hope blossoming in his chest. Considering the strict gun laws in Japan, most fights were settled using fists, baseball bats, and long knives. Big Bro Shinobu was the only one who carried a gun around. He struggled up from his position hiding behind a couch, only to see the monstrosity had one arm wrapped around the Yakuza's head. The burly man was held at arm's length even as he continued to shoot at the monster at point-blank range. The bullets barely formed wounds that were quickly plugged back up. The older man's eyes found him from where he just stood. The usually fierce and arrogant man's face was squeezed into what he never expected to see on such a man's face. His eyes already had tears forming in them, while his screams were strangled by a monstrous finger down his throat. The moment the gun clicked empty, whatever fear was in his eyes magnified as he finally found his voice, getting past the digit. Shinichi ducked back into cover a second before the loud squelch of the monster's hand closed with force over the enclosed head. Half of the gang was ripped apart, and their organs and guts had been used to redecorate the simple house they found themselves in. The two toughest men he knew, Boss Eiji and Big Bro Shinobu, were also dead. He knew he was dead. There was no surviving whatever this was. The door to the house opened, and he heard a child's voice call out nonchalantly. "Hey Dad, this is the place." It's a pretty big one, isn't it?" An older voice called out. The voice was followed by steps. Heavy steps that forced the wooden ground they stepped on to creak and groan. "Why don't you try taking this one on by yourself, brat? There are easier ways to kill me if you want me dead, you overly muscled ape." Came a younger dismissive voice. He crawled to the side to peep behind his barricade. He wasn't certain who these crazy people were, talking and bantering like they were not stepping on the blood-soaked and gut-strewn floor created by his dead comrades. But he'll be sent to hell and back if he doesn't take this God-given chance for what it is. Huh, you're one lazy brat, aren't you? He finally looked around and saw the two intruders. A younger boy with black hair and dark eyes and an older man with strikingly similar features. When I was your age, I was already out there taking risks. What's your excuse, brat? Shinichi sent a calculating glance at the duo. The kid wasn't anything special, but the man was muscular and tall with a scar at the edge of his lips. His sheer presence reeked of violence, highlighted by the tight muscle shirt he had on. Every twitch, every shuffle screamed of restrained violence. A musculature that strained against will. Yet, in the end, the man was human. He would die to the creature all the same, but Shinichi was sure he would give him the head start he needed to run. Tossing the kid at the monster should give him an additional 3 seconds at least. He shifted his glance to the multi-limbed monstrosity and realized it had frozen the instant the duo walked in. With limbs that seemed to tremble. What? Was it suddenly scared? Impossible. The monster had ripped through 7 of some of the most hardened men he had known for over 5 years. Men who had dipped their toes into violence for the better half of their lives. It had torn them apart with the ease of a child plucking the wings off a fly. A twitch, and he refocused on the monster. It was at least the size of 3 men and was forced to hunch over in the apartment due to its sheer height. It was a massive being with putrid yellow skin the color of infected pus and shaped like a traditional sumo wrestler. It stood upright on 4 massive arms the size of a fridge that held up the disgustingly obese frame with ease. Its upper half was a mess of fat with 3 faces seemingly screaming and stuck in a frame of pain. The wife and daughter. It had dropped to the ground, using all its 6 limbs to grip the ground as the duo continued to ignore it to argue among themselves. Shinichi knew that stance. He had watched enough American football with his brothers. It was a running tackle stance, aimed solely at the still bantering man and boy duo. I was really been lackadaisical with your training, back then lackadaisical. The kid interrupted the man with a raised eyebrow. You abandoned me at the top of Mount Kumatori a week ago and expected me to make it back in 2 days. I was back home in 26 hours. I would have made it back in 12 hours, the man replied with a smirk. We're not all muscle-bound freaks of, the monster moved. It had finally had enough of the utter disregard the duo had treated it with for the past few seconds. Its sheer movement splintered the ground it was on as it channeled its strength into its huge limbs, propelling it forward. And Shinichi was in the perfect position to take advantage of it. A split second later, the monster was missing, and the duo were still standing there relaxed. Nature like you. Shinichi wiped his eyes and looked at the scene again. What had happened? He had not even blinked. So what the heck did he just miss? They stood as they had always been, with the older man looking down at the boy as the kid argued his point. He realized a heartbeat later there was a change. The man's hand was outstretched behind him. But how? He had not even seen the man move. By the way, I'm not going to have a running battle in the town with you. You could have just killed it here. The sound of debris falling from the opposite wall drew his attention, and he looked and saw a hole in the wall. A hole the size of a car that was fresh enough that he could still see the wiring in the walls sparking at their sudden disconnection and exposure. He knew what had occurred. He was smart enough to place the dots. A missing monster. An outstretched arm and a hole in the wall. It was not hard to solve that particular mystery. What turned everything on its head was the how. It was impossible. Then again, who was he to say what was actually impossible and what was not? He had just seen a monster be born of a depressed madman who smashed in the head of his wife and daughter before hanging himself after they had pressured him until he broke. If I had done that, the useless sap of a man might have gotten hit by something, and we wouldn't be any richer for the effort. What did I tell you about making money, brat? A monster that had killed almost everything and everyone he knew. Who was he to say anything about the impossible? He thought with a hysterical giggle. He blinked and realized he was lying down in a fetal position with his arms circled around his knees. When had he fallen? Minimum effort, at maximum profit, and never doing something until you're certain you'll be paid for it, came the voice of the kid, bearing a tone that had a hint of recital to it. That's my brat. The sound of a foot on fleshy entrails drew him out of his funk. The disappearance of his shield and barricade couch forced him to his knees. He raised his eyes at the duo. Uncomprehending eyes stared at the man and boy, just as they stared back at him with an apathetic look mirrored on their faces. The man said something, but he was too far gone. The sheer madness and insanity he had witnessed over the past few minutes and had been forced to endure had bent him. The impossibility of what the man had done finally broke him. The kid shifted back a smidge to brace himself before launching his left leg forward in a kick that connected with the side of his head. The force of the blow sent him skidding back over blood and entrails before he was finally stopped by something soft. He moved to rise back up with trembling hands, his thoughts clearing up from the fog of despair that had clouded them. He turned his head to see what arrested his momentum and looked down at the beaten and battered body of another old friend, Mano. His original brown hair and mixed handsome features squeezed together and crumpled into a disgusting mess of meat, bone, hair, and flesh. He stumbled back with hysterical movements, forcing himself back to his feet. "He's finally with us," a voice called out from behind him. He spun around with adrenaline-fueled force and stepped on an intestine that slipped him up and forced him back to the ground. At least, that is what should have happened if a hand hadn't blurred out and snapped his head up by his hair, arresting his momentum and leaving him in an awkward position. "Who are you?" he asked with a stutter. The man's seemingly apathetic visage twisted into something he must have thought was a smile. His scarred lips rose and highlighted his shark-like teeth. "You're asking the wrong questions to the right people," the voice came out, rough and dry. "The question is, how much is your life worth?" What?" came his response. "He's trying to rip you off of all you have, and you've no choice but to allow it. Unless you'd rather be back with the cursed spirit. I'm sure we can find a way to dump you back wherever he sent it to," the kid spoke up with an uncaring shrug. With the words came more clarity. With clarity came righteous anger. Enough anger fueled him. He was not sure about what they were saying, but the monster wasn't here again. He was dealing with humans once more. It was just him, a trained Yakuza against a man and boy. A boy who kicked him in the face and a man who was still holding him up by his hair in a position unfitting for a man of his stature. "You kicked me, you bastard, I will." Everything went black. What had happened again? He couldn't remember. He felt pressure on his head, and he blinked blood out of his eyes before realizing more got back in as he tried to blink them out. He was facing the floor? He had been saying something just a few seconds ago. His head was dragged up, and his blurry eyes picked up the indentation that had formed on the wooden floor after his head was lifted up. He was slammed into the floor. Was that what happened? The shock held back the pain, yet he could feel it coiling. Testing the edges of his awareness, looking for the best time to hit. The scarred man moved to a crouch and brought Shinichi's blood-soaked face up to look him in the eye. Face to face with the man, he felt chills go down his spine. The man's black eyes were blank, completely devoid of feelings and emotions. His features were set into a stone mask as those cold fish eyes stared deep into Shinichi's soul. I'm the only one allowed to speak to him like that. Somehow the voice had gotten low with an even tougher tone. Yet Shinichi heard the words with all the clarity of a gunshot in his ear. His heart beat in his chest like a chained beast straining against chains that held it down. This close, he saw death, and it had empty shark eyes and scarred lips. He let out forceful and quick head nods, stuttering out apologies as the man kept staring at him. Another hit like that, and I'm not sure he would even remember his account number, the kid noted from behind the man. "Oh shit, he hasn't paid us, has he?" The man said, his previous tone and expression fading into what Shinichi was starting to realize was a signature smirk. "So answer the question, you Yakuza bastard, how much is your life worth?" With trembling lips and a glance at the ripped-apart remains of his former partners, he stuttered out a reply. A reply that made the man's smirk transform into a full-tooth grin. "Everything. You're in so much shit." The kid replied with a chuckle. He hated hospitals. Yet here he was, walking through another for the second time today, with a formal button-up white shirt and tie, because that was how she always wanted to see him, wasn't it? He tugged at the collar with one hand while his second held Japanese iris flowers, her favorites. Good thing they signified good news, because that was what he honestly hoped for. Hospital attendants and nurses saw him and gave him distance, struggling and tumbling over themselves to get out of his way. He would have assumed they were scared of his no doubt impressive scowl, but he knew their fear had more to do with the over 6-foot man behind him with a scar and a matching scowl. They got to the room, and he hesitated to open the door for a moment. For once, Toji didn't slap him over the head for hesitating, so he marinated in mixed emotions of hope, fear, and anxiety. He gripped the door and forced it open to see the sprayed-out form of Tsumaki. Her beautiful brown hair laid out around her face had dulled in shine the longer she stayed here. He walked up to her bedside, and sitting on the chair placed there, he took hold of her hands, her two cold hands. She could have been mistaken for dead. Yet keen ears noted the slow beating of her heart. "How is she?" The rough voice of his father calls out, and he sends a glance at him. The renowned sorcerer killer also had on a white button-up shirt tucked into black pants. Although his black tie had found its way into his pocket. Yet not even Toji was immune to Tsumiki's scolding. "Still comatose," he replies, his tone tired. Despite their hope. Despite all the money they've been funneling into the hospital and the increased amount of jobs they've been taking. At this point, he knew the bills they paid alone contributed a solid % to the hospital's earnings. "So we've exhausted all the mundane means to revive her then," Toji admits easily, as he keeps his eyes on the unconscious form of his stepdaughter. "I know that." Megumi lets out a sigh. Sadness turns to anger, and anger clouds his reasoning, yet Toji's only reply is a frown and a glare. She would have been rolling on the floor right now if she witnessed Toji being the responsible one while he was left lashing out like a child. "I spoke to Shu Kong." Those words brought to mind the cigarette-smoking, suit-wearing mediator who worked part-time as a handler for them. "We figure we have a better chance of waking her up with the reverse curse technique, and luckily for us, I know where the best user in Japan is. I also have my way of getting in." He looks up and watches the way a confident smirk spreads out on Toji's scarred lips, and for the first time in months, he feels hope. He lets his eyes wander back to Tsumiki's and whispers to her still form, "Wait for me, big sis." He looked at himself in the mirror and almost couldn't recognize the person staring back at him. Contrasting images of white short hair overlapped with the black ponytail he carried in his past life. Gray placid eyes in contrast to the pitch-black orbs befitting of a pure-blooded Uchiha with a direct ancestry to Madara himself. With a thin nose surrounded by high cheekbones, he was an almost complete carbon copy of Satoru. The only distinguishing features were his gray eyes and his generally stoic features. The usual stress lines beneath his eyes had also begun to clear out. This new world was many things, but it had nothing that had the sheer intensity of beginning a shinobi career at the tender age of 7 and the responsibilities that came with being the scion of a clan as prestigious as the Uchiha. He had also grown taller, he realized with a quick measurement in front of the mirror. His fit frame was covered in a white half-hand haori, a black inner yukata, and a matching black hakama, with a pair of brown geta sandals on his feet, an informal version of the Jujutsu high school uniform. Yet, there were privileges afforded to special grades, and a personalized version of the uniform was one of the perks. After all, they were the exception. Despite his initial dislike for more formal wear, he found it difficult to reject the few wishes Aiko asked of him, and she had grown to love the way the more traditional dressing looked on him. So he had let it be, leading to acceptance born of familiarity. 2 matching black earrings hung off his ears, bringing up memories of a lost friend. He tore his eyes away from the mirror as he tried to shake off thoughts of ghetto. Jiki. The door opened with some force as Aiko rushed in before bending over to suck in as much air as her frame could take. He had picked up the sounds of her feet slapping against the traditional floor of the house in a hurry while he studied himself in the mirror. Sending her a glance and a soft smile, she replied with a wide, heartwarming smile. "Ah, I thought I was too late already." "We are," he replied with an uncaring shrug before turning his eyes back to the mirror. Aiko had stayed behind in the village to watch her recovering parents, and he didn't have it in him to request her presence back so soon. "It doesn't matter. Yaga-san might not like it, but as long as I show up today, there should be no real problem." He had ended up picking Tokyo Jujutsu High, to no real surprise, other than an hour-long call from Mei-san guilt-tripping him into owing her a shopping trip. She got control of her breathing before taking quick and long steps to hug him from behind, pressing his head into her bosom and smothering him with more love than any other person had to give. "I thought I'd be too late. Especially since I won't be there with you." He felt a pang in his chest at the confirmation of the words. Students at Tokyo Jujutsu High were mandated to stay on campus. This was a rule originally created to ensure the protection of the future jujutsu sorcerers in a time of monsters and legends. Now it was enforced so that clan-bred sorcerers would not be able to rely solely on the influence of their clans and learn to stand on their own feet in the outside world. He supposed some people saw the appeal in it, and rationally it obviously made a lot of sense. Yet that didn't stop his feelings on how this setup would affect their relationship. She must have sensed the change in his mood, even if his emotional turmoil was not present on his face. So she swiveled his chair to face her, yellow cat-like eyes staring into dull gray. You can still come visiting whenever you like, plus you'll have loads of stories to tell me. Those stories would most likely contain excessive amounts of sadness, death, blood, and gore, he replied with a raised brow. Aiko was a lot of things: brave, kind, caring, and intelligent. One thing she wasn't was sorcerer material. She could not compartmentalize her thoughts like the truly prepared could. People born and bred for this lifestyle. The ability to discard the horrors that you witness in the morning and go have chicken soup for lunch with a smile on your face while talking with friends. Like it was for Shinobi, there is a needed spark. Shirsu used to call it a spark of madness. A spark that was needed to do the kinds of things they did. He personally believed they each had something missing. Something fundamental to humanity was lost during the upliftment that came with the realization that you were more than human. Shinobi or sorcerer, it was all the same. Yet he wouldn't have her any other way. She bunched up her face at him into an exaggerated pout that turned his half-smile into a full-blown grin. As long as it's you telling the stories, I won't mind. There's also old man Tatsumi to watch out for now that he's getting so old. He chuckled at the thought of the old man with a physique better than most athletes, and with almost a century of experience under his belt, actually needing the aid of Aiko with anything. Yet he nodded because he understood what the offer really was. An open-handed offer for reconciliation. Even if no one in the clan truly dared to treat her like a maid, he would be gone for a long time. Anything could happen in that span of time. That's why he agreed with the offer. Old man Tatsumi's presence would be a shield against the internal politics she might have faced with his absence. Now come on, she dragged him up by his hands, and he allowed the motion, letting her pull him to his feet. You should not be too late on your first day of school. She woke up the moment the car stopped. Her inhuman musculature and sense of balance highlighted the moment the movement in the car, the pistons, the gears, and the engine, stopped. She forced bleary eyes open before rubbing them in a useless effort to shake off her dreams. Unfortunately, those dreams were formed with the truths that were her memories as a base, which made them harder to shrug off. But today was her first day away. A day away without the shackles that were her clan. We're here, young lady. All right, she replied to the older man before putting on her glasses and stepping out of the car. It was the job of a second to wrap her green hair up in a high ponytail that fell to her neck before opening the boot and taking out her bags. She turned around and stared at the beginning of a new life as the driver turned on his car once more. The red torii gate stretched deep into the mountain pathway that led into the school. Are you sure this is where you want to stop? The driver asked her once more, concern etched on his weathered face. They were on a pathway on the outskirts of Japan that didn't seem to see much traffic, with their car being the only vehicle for several miles. People she called family. She gave him a sharp grin in response. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To be seen and recognized. Don't worry, old man, I'm going to be all right, she replied with a wave. The older man gave the surroundings one more glance before passing her a slip of paper. That's my number. In case you're in trouble, don't hesitate to call me, and I'll be here to pick you up. Take care of yourself, kid. He took off, and even while driving, he kept on sending glances back through the mirror at her. Mao Mao, such a kind Gigi. Ah. She let out a yell at the sudden voice that came from behind her, pirouetting on her left foot to dish out an explosive kick. An explosive kick that was forced to a halt right in front of a white-haired man with chiseled features, a blindfold, and a wide smirk. Attacking a teacher already. This year is gearing up to be something already. Ah. She let out another scream, but this time in embarrassment, before dropping her bags and moving into a formal bow. I'm sorry. She shouted out loud. She just lashed out at the strongest sorcerer of the modern era. Hee 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 hee. The white-haired sorcerer let out a laugh as he hugged his stomach. You should have seen your face. She raised her head with a weird look on her face. Was this goofy man truly Satoru Gojo? As they walked up the stairs, she realized that, unfortunately for the image in her head, he was the man and the living legend all in one. Although she had lost most of the respect she had come to have, she rated the man just after minutes with him. Then he said, "You won't be alone for long." Can you believe it? My cute little Jiki-kun. Now he's all grown up and doesn't even bother to call me when taking on centuries-old threats. Oh, the horror. He ended and started cleaning away fake tears. She had spent the last few minutes climbing up the mountain and learning more about the rumored malevolent-eyed Gojo than she ever thought she would know. Still, even with the fake tears and exaggerated wailing, she could see how proud of him Satoru was. They got to the top of the treacherous steps, and she sent a glance at the suddenly quiet man. His breath was remarkably in sync, she noted. The walk was nothing to her considering her physique, yet he matched her without even a single evidence of weariness. You don't have to worry about the Zenin clan from here on. Her head snapped back to him in surprise. She had not known he was familiar with the inner workings of the clan, and the sudden seriousness he spoke with surprised her. I'm not saying you've escaped Nobito's reach completely, but this far away from him and under my watch, he will be heavily limited with what power he can wield against you. He turned his head to face her, and even if she could not see his eyes, she could tell by the set of his jaw, the quick flare of breath, and the steadiness of his heartbeat and pulse. To truly break from the shackles of your clan, you would need to be strong. To be one of the exceptional few that can force the world to hold its breath for their passing. Till then, I will be your shade. She ducked her head in a quick show of thanks, and to hide the tears that tried to form in her eyes. She had been away from her clan for less than 12 hours, and she almost couldn't believe the difference in treatment. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe he was truly a trustworthy and reliable man. Mao, I'm so hungry. I'm going to freeload off the kitchen staff for a bit. Head to the corner of that building, and when you see a weird-faced elephant statue, turn to your right and walk into the building. That's the orientation center. Toodles. She snapped her head up to see the world's strongest sorcerer twist his hands into a sign and abandon her in a displacement of air and his signature smirk. She stared at the spot, gobsmacked for another 3 seconds before she shook her head and set her glasses in place. She was starting to suspect the world's greatest sorcerer was a moron and a fraud all in one. The architecture of Tokyo Metropolitan Jujutsu High was a very familiar one for someone who lived in a centuries-old clan. It possessed aged wooden buildings with remarkable arches and painted doors, seal-etched statues, and doors reminiscent of a time without the rumored Master Tingen's protections. She got to the door that was supposed to be used for introductions, dropping her bags at the sides, and knocked heavily before stepping in. She was greeted by the sight of 3 teenagers staring back at her. Her inhumanly sharp eyes picked up the details quickly. The first one was a platinum blonde-haired teen with purple eyes and a shawl that covered his lower face. He greeted her with a 2-finger peace sign. The second was a teddy bear, a giant white and black ball of fur that waved at her with a big smile that was all teeth. She doubted it knew how threatening that display was. Finally, the last person was a brown-eyed and brown-haired girl with little distinguishing features other than a birthmark on the top of her lips. She fidgeted on her seat and constantly bit her lips while looking at anywhere but her. Maki took a quick calming breath before stiffening her spine and announcing her name. I'm Maki. Just Maki. She finished with a sharp glare, waiting for someone to ask for her clan name. Fortunately, they took the hint, and the next person to speak was the black and white bear. Hello, I'm Panda. It greeted us. It could even talk, which should not have been as much of a surprise if she was honest. Kelp, the blonde-haired teen replied. Huh? I am Emmy, and nice to meet you, the last girl stuttered with her eyes down. Maki looked back at the 3 people she was going to spend her first year with, and was already considering if the Zenin clan would have her back. No, she had to think positive thoughts only. A class filled with a shy girl, a weirdo, and a talking bear couldn't be all bad, right? The sliding door opened once more, and a man walked in. A giant man with dark shades and a darker skin tone. Right on time then, take a seat, he directed the last one at her, and she hurried to take a seat right next to the fidgeting girl. The man stared at them for a few seconds before he began to speak. My name is Masamichi Yaga, and I am the current principal of Tokyo Prefectural Jujutsu High School. This is only an orientation, so I'm going to keep it short and to the point. I like punctuality and earnestness from my students. Unfortunately, one of you is already late, he added after a brief glance around. She idly wondered who the last person was. There were already plenty enough, according to what she knew about the classes at Jujutsu High. The principal sent a hand to rub the side of his head in an exasperated motion while murmuring, "Damn Gojos and stressing me dash knock knock." The sound rang out in the quiet room, and the principal sent another glance at the door before letting out a sigh and calling out, "Come in." The doors slid open again for the second time, and a teen walked in. The white-haired, relatively tall teen walked in with practiced and measured movements. Unlike the blue jacket and bottoms the rest of them wore, He was dressed in a more traditional Hayori and Yukata combination. He stepped in and transitioned into a curt but formal bow at the principal before turning to face them. Maki stared into an aloof face that might as well have been shaped from granite, bearing sharp features and half-lidded eyes. Yet even half-lidded, she could see the slow spin of black pinwheels in a sea of red, and she knew who he was with that simple look. "Gojo Jiki, nice to meet you." She stared at the serene-looking white-haired teen in surprise. He didn't need any actual introduction. There was not a single person in the world of jujutsu who didn't know him, by sheer reputation if nothing else. The one that was rumored to stand at the peak with Satoru one day. The reclusive Gojo, bearer of the mutated 6 eyes, eyes that were rumored to bear so much hate and malevolence it took inhuman willpower and cursed energy to look him in the eye. The prodigy who killed his first cursed spirit at the tender age of 6 and the youngest special grade sorcerer in the last 3 centuries. The Zenin clan had tried to marry Mai off to him in an attempt to bring him into the clan, but the previous Gojo clan head had denied the arrangement. When they brought the offer for the second time after the first clan head stepped down, she heard rumors that Gojo Satoru had laughed in the Zenin clan envoy's face, her father's face, before sending them packing. Naobito never forgot that slight, and the child had been a thorn in the Zenin clan's side, for all he seemed ignorant of it. "You're late," came the stern and authoritative voice of Principal Yaga. "Apologies," the teen replied calmly. The scolding tone had broken through his apathetic defense. The principal made to speak further before deciding against it. "Take a seat beside Maki. You can do your introductions later." Jiki nodded curtly at him again before walking. She noticed the way he slid his feet on the floor in a way that didn't create any sound. A killer's walk. A technique she had observed in one other person years ago, her older cousin Naoi. Principal Yaga cleared his throat to draw back attention to him before he started speaking. "We usually have 2 or 3 students every year. Fortunately or unfortunately, something changed. We have ranging theories, but that is not for you to bother about. The number of sorcerers born in the past 15 years has multiplied, and we believe it'll be increasing even more in the coming years." He sent a brief glance at the white-haired teen. "Your assigned teacher will be Gojo Satoru, who for some reason has decided to venture into education. That should not make you negligent. To be a jujutsu sorcerer is to dance with death, to know it intimately in a way few people ever manage to do. To be a true jujutsu sorcerer is to have conviction so strong that whenever you die, you do so without regrets. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir," they all chorused in response. "No, you don't," he replied in a low tone. "But you will. Now I'll give you a few minutes to get to know yourselves before Satoru comes along. Welcome to Jujutsu Tech." With those ominous parting words, the man stepped out of the classroom with heavy steps that echoed in the silence. Maki sent glances at her fellow classmates. Her eyes naturally gravitated to the one person who had the most presence in the room even without trying. Gojo Jiki sat straight beside her, legs stretched out and crossed, eyes closed, and one hand folded and hanging out of his Hayori in front of him. She would have mistaken him for asleep if not for his well-measured breath and the lack of movement of his eyes beneath the eyelids that would have indicated REM sleep. Even this relaxed, his mere presence screamed danger to her. Instincts long honed in the treacherous pit that was the Zenin clan were screaming out at her, tugging wildly at her fight-or-flight response. Only her near-total control over her body kept her from acting out on the supposed danger. She forced her attention away to the others. Panda was the next person her eyes went to. Of all her new classmates, he was the most confusing. Simply because he wasn't human. Yet he was not a curse. He had no real heartbeat she could hear, no lungs to take in and filter out oxygen, no kidneys to break down toxins, and no real scent that she could perceive. What he did have were points in his body that were particularly dense with cursed energy, points that she only picked up due to how fine-tuned her glasses were. Her eyes glanced over the nervous girl and landed on the scion of the Inumaki clan. Panda had tried to start a conversation with him only to get single-word replies that had to do with food. The platinum blonde-haired teen seemed to enjoy the confusion that the panda was undergoing and continued to needle him further with his response. Her knowledge of his clan was vague considering how much the Zenin clan tried to stifle her growth and relegate her to a maid not even fit to marry off. The more the platinum blonde teen continued to speak, the more it needled her till she had enough. "Hey!" she called out before stepping up and walking to face the platinum blonde teen. What the hell is kelp supposed to mean as a response to a simple hello? She stared down at the wide-eyed blonde before a reply finally came from the most unexpected voice. "It's a greeting." "Huh?" was her astounding reply to the surprising addition. She idly noted his voice was soft and silky in a way she didn't expect. Jiki continued to speak without opening his eyes or even moving from his lounging state. The Inumaki clan makes use of cursed speech. This inadvertently affects their ability to hold a regular conversation. He is using the names of food to replace words. Kelp is a greeting. "And how do you know this?" She rounded up to face him. The white-haired teen finally opened his eyes a bit to stare at her blankly before he continued. "Intuition, intonation, and body language. He is saying kelp, but the intonation of the words is more reminiscent of hello." His body language was open and welcoming till it changed to mischievous and cunning when the panda got confused and finally defensive and worried when you rounded up on him aggressively. With those last words, the white-haired teen closed his half-lidded eyes and went still once more. Yet the effects of his words could be felt even as they resounded in her head. Defensive and worried when you rounded up on him aggressively. She took a step back and looked at the purple-eyed teen. She had noticed the way he tensed up, yet she had no real reference to interpret the motion accurately. She was more used to people getting aggressive when she asked questions. She took a step back and gave him a short bow in apology, saying, "I'm sorry for that," and he replied with his body loosening up and a smile. "Salmon." Her eyes went to the still resting Jiki, and he answered her unasked question even with his eyes closed. Affirmation. "See, we're all good, right?" the panda asked with wide eyes, and what she was starting to see was his signature innocent smile. "Salmon," the Inumaki replied with a raised thumbs up at her. Affirmation/agreement. Her mind automatically translated it, and she smiled in response before sending back a thumbs up. "Salmon," she replied, and even with his mouth covered by the scarf, she could see how the visible parts of his face formed a smile. "My cute little students are already making friends, eh?" She spun again, and only previous experience with the elder Gojo stopped her from the wasted effort of planting a kick in his sides. The wide grinning face of Gojo Satoru was inches from hers. His grin suddenly grew even wider, and somehow she knew he had an idea of what she was about to do. "Damn, Gojos. If the introductions are done, I have a mission already prepared for you." "What?" Mao, it's just a quick invis. This was supposed to be an introduction class," she replied hotly. Surprisingly, every other person didn't seem to mind much. "Oh, that's true," Satoru admitted with a thoughtful frown on his face, and she breathed out, happy she had finally gotten through to him before he continued with a big smile. "What better way to be introduced to the world of jujutsu than experiencing it yourself, eh?" He finished with a satisfied smirk on his face, like he had solved the greatest mystery. She fell to her knees in horror. "We have a bus," the panda exclaimed in surprise as he went to touch it to make sure it was not an illusion. "We do. We don't use it much, but you guys have a lot to stuff into a car. Let's hope Ajichi's driving experience translates well with a 12-seater, Gojo replied with his regular smile and laissez-faire attitude. Speaking of Ajichi. A suited man wound down the window of the driver's seat before waving at them. Jiki took it to mean that was the man, considering the way Satoru waved back. The man's cursed energy output was minimal. The only person he had an edge over in terms of cursed energy seemed to be the Zenin girl. Not that she stated it, but if you knew what to look for, it was startlingly clear. The slant of the brow, the tilt of her eyes, the almost predatory features, and her desire to avoid any topic of her clan. It almost reminded him of another Zenin. Her non-existent cursed energy expulsion only solidified that thought. Another heavenly restriction then. From the immense control she had over her musculature, he was almost certain it was a heavenly restriction similar to Toji's. His hand twitched at the thought of exchanging blows with someone of Toji's caliber. A superhuman physique that not even cursed energy reinforcement could match easily. "You're smiling." He looked up to see her up in his face again. Maki Zenin. All pent-up anger and vinegar. His mind registered what she said, and he reached up to touch his cheeks to realize he really was. It was slight, nearly impossible to see, but her eyes were proving just as sharp as her mouth. The Zenin clan seemed to be blessed and cursed with the attention of the heavens, it seemed. Was it a generational thing? He mused. "I was thinking of something." He noted she was carrying a single gym bag over her shoulders. "The mission? she inquired even as she turned her eyes back at the bus and the conversation between Satoru and ITACHI. Somewhat. The odds of facing something that was going to be a challenge with what his eyes picked up were an inexperienced curse speech user, a cursed puppet, a girl without cursed energy, and finally a seemingly civilian girl without a Jujutsu clan's early teaching was next to nothing. Not even Satoru would throw them into those kinds of deep ends. Then again, he was an anomaly here, maybe. Oh, by the way, you're sitting this one out, Jiki. Satoru called out from ahead of them. That cleared things then. It was probably going to be a grade 3 or, considering their sheer numbers, maybe a semi-grade 2 cursed spirit. Maki sent him a quick glance before moving ahead to get on the bus. He let them all get on before climbing on. He took a seat beside the Inu Maki, hoping that would reduce whatever conversation he would have had to engage in otherwise, before closing his eyes as the trip started. His rest was broken by a poke in his side, and he forced his eyes open to see the panda staring right up in his face. He raised a delicate eyebrow at the cursed puppet before it bared its teeth at him in its attempt at a smile. "Hello, I'm Panda. Nice to meet you." So it didn't just look like a panda, it named itself one. "Same," he nodded in response. "You're Gojo Jiki, right? Alright, quiet up for a bit." Satoru interrupted the budding conversation with a yell as he stood up and spun to face them with a smile. "Now, this shouldn't be tough. It's just a way for me to see how you will react under the kind of pressure that comes with facing a curse for the first time." They all replied with varying nods before focusing on their preparation. Jiki closed his eyes once more. "We're here." He was forced awake to the sound of his cousin's yell. Blinking his eyes open, he realized they had gotten to their destination, in one piece too. Panda and Maki stood up first. It seemed like they had not bothered with taking a short rest and climbed down from the bus quickly. Inu Maki followed them with a lazy stride and his hands in his pocket. Jiki was left with the civilian girl. He stared down at her shaking form in the chair and felt the sudden urge to say something. He might not be the most conversational person, but just like back in Aiko's village, leaving a confused and scared person to themselves never seemed right to him. But this girl was not just a mundane child incapable of understanding what was going on. No, she could see. That meant he could not treat her the same way. "Hey," he called out calmly, forcing the girl's eyes up to him. "You're worried, yes?" A blank look was his answer, so he continued. "Good. You should be." What?" came the stuttered reply. One he ignored as he continued to stare at her. A remnant of his time as captain of the Hidden Leaf's Umbu Corps leaked into his voice. "For you are weak." "I am not," she replied, forcing herself to her feet. If nothing else, she was not going to roll over, he noted with a slight smile. "There is nothing wrong with being weak or scared," he continued, lowering his voice to soothe. "Fear is an inbuilt emotion that ensures survival. Embrace it. What you should not accept is remaining so. Satoru is here. This is the one time your safety is assured. Use this opportunity to see the world for what it truly is, and maybe you won't remain so for long." With his spiel done, he gave her a last nod and turned away, heading out of the bus. He idly noted the way her sporadic breathing and nervous jitterings died down, so it was not a complete waste then. They had stopped in front of an abandoned building. He looked at the structure with a discerning eye and noted its architecture was old. Cracked walls and broken window frames littered the building, and the single entrance that led in and out was boarded up. Satoru waved at him from the entrance where he stood beside his fellow students, and he waved back before heading towards them. The quiet echo of trailing steps behind him. "So this is it," Satoru started before bringing out a stopwatch from his pocket. "This is a contracted job and normally would be left for actual sorcerers, but I deemed it good enough for you guys." He clicked the button before facing them. "You've 10 minutes to clear the building, and your time starts now." He grinned at them. Jiki noted Maki was the first person to react. The moment Satoru pressed down on the button, she unzipped her bag and pulled out 2 short sticks that she attached together to form a staff. In one smooth movement, she lashed out at the boarded-up door. The force of the blow sent it flying inward. A second later, she was already in after it. Inumaki followed her in, reacting faster than the panda and the civilian girl. He eyed them as they all rushed in before Satoru finally addressed him. "It was nice what you did for her." He tilted his head to face his cousin and noted he was surprisingly serious. "That should have been your job as the teacher," he replied as he turned back to the building, trying to track their movements. True, I could have done that easily, but this is not just about teaching. Jiki could spot it even if Satoru didn't say it outright. Just like Kakashi did a lifetime ago, Satoru was preparing him for a leadership role. "HN," he replied. "Mao Mao, are you annoyed with that? My cute Jiki-kun is all grown up now and doesn't want to help out his big brother." Satoru let out an exaggerated fake wail that he ignored easily. Anyway, he continued with a quick switch-up in character. "I don't suppose you've realized domain expansion to add to your repertoire of techniques?" "No," Jiki answered, putting in effort to keep his annoyance from leaking out. The whole concept of a domain was not one he was familiar with, but with his intellect, he could understand it. Yet he had found it impossible to form. "Don't sweat it, it's nothing unusual," Satoru consoled him with a quick poke at his forehead. "Still, you might be a special grade right now, but your lack of a domain would be dangerous if you're unfortunate enough to face something with the ability to use it." "Old man Tatsumi said there were counters to it," Jiki replied, his eyes still on the building as the sound of combat, screeching, and struggling got to them. But would he truly need them? He mused distractedly. While domain expansions were touted as the pinnacle of sorcery, the Susanoo was the pinnacle of what it meant to be an Uchiha. Its manifestation was not a trifle to witness, and it had felt different since he came to this world. A metaphysical weight was attached to the name. Now, armed with the Yata mirror, could he fend off a domain? Yes. That is what you'll be focusing on for the rest of the year. You'll have to be prepared, Jiki. The seriousness in Satoru's voice drew his attention again. "Something is brewing, Jiki. I can feel it, see it, and sense it intimately. Fate has been spurned, twisted, and turned, but it won't be denied." Satoru tilted his head a bit, and his glasses dropped a bit, allowing Jiki insight into those eerie blue eyes. "You'll need to be ready, Jiki." "I will," Jiki replied, his tone hard. He had not forgotten the promise he made all those years ago. Jiki dreamt. He knew it was a dream because his earliest memory was of walking. He traveled down familiar pathways, sandaled feet sliding on wooden floors. The movement of the cold night breeze gently shook the sakura blossom trees she had planted a few years before his birth, and the fall of those pink leaves signaled the end of an era. The smell of a recently finished meal mixed with the iron tang of blood was heavy in the air. He didn't need to look at himself to know he was covered in a copious amount of that life-giving liquid. He knew where he was after all. He could feel the armor that protected his chest suddenly multiply in weight. His shin guard felt loose and hampered his movements. The matching pale white forearm guard seemingly itched fiercely, and he had to strangle the sudden urge to recheck if he secured it well. He did. He was just feeling something few would believe he was familiar with. Uncertainty. His keen ears picked up the shuffle of movement in the room he was heading to, and he turned his head at it. His ponytail hit something behind him. The implement of his upcoming murder. He does not even make an attempt to sway the scenario playing out. It was one of his own making. A culmination of fate, chance, and his own decisions. Was it flawed? Yes. Yet it was the only option left to him, to take on the sins of his lineage for the greater good. All in an attempt to stop a coup that would have weakened the Leaf enough that another war was certain. One of the Leaf would not survive. Not with the rapid loss of hundreds of active shinobi. Not with the loss of their Jinchuriki. And especially not with the loss of their Hokage. No. The Leaf was weak. Weak in a way few people realized. The illusion of strength the third Hokage projected was just that. An illusion. Yet one that the other villages were not ready to risk. That was partly because of the amount of covert ops the Umbu and Root had accomplished in the dark. If the plan went through, the Uchiha would succeed in their coup, easily in fact. So he agreed with this flawed counterplan. His steps brought him to the sliding door his parents were lurking behind, and just like every other time he had this dream, he stopped at the door. "Come in, Itachi. There are no traps." Itachi. He had almost forgotten his own name. He slid the door open to face the straight backs of his father and mother. They were dressed in more formal wear. He could see the discarded Jonin jacket his father must have worn earlier and the mesh shirt and battle armor that would have accompanied it in the corner. If they had fought, he could not honestly claim victory. Not when his father had the same eyes as him with more experience using them. Including his mother, a former Jonin of the Hidden Leaf, and he would have certainly lost. Yet here they were, sitting in Seiza with backs to him and necks bare. A damned pose. I do not want to participate in a death match with my own son, his father called out, voice low. Yet I want you to promise me one thing, Itachi. Promise me you will take care of Sasuke. That was all it took to break him all over again. He could feel hot tears drop past his cheeks even as his hand stretched behind him to unsheath his standard-issue ninjato. Just like every other time he found himself here, he remembers with uncanny clarity the way his mother's hand shook, even as she squeezed it tight against her thighs. His Sharingan was both a curse and a blessing, but he would not spare himself of his sins. He allowed the memory to burn itself into his brain once more, even as his hand swung automatically. The last words that echoed out from his father's lips were, "You truly are a kind child." He opened widely spinning eyes slowly, ignoring the clarity of the dream, for it was not one to fade off with awakening. He stared up at the wooden roof above him. It was almost reminiscent of how he woke up in this world for the first time, he realizes with a smile. But without the comfort of Aiko knocking on his door for the first time. He moves to stand, smoothly transitioning to his feet. The mirror ahead shows he had let his hair grow out. Over the past couple of months, it had grown out somewhat, reaching far enough to go down his neck. He observes his morning ablutions quickly, a bath, brushing, and finally tying his hair into a bun with 2 bangs falling to the side of his face, just like how he carried it in his past life. He slots in the black dangling earrings. At the same moment the door slams wide open. "Are you ready?" He ignores the overenthusiastic yell of the cursed puppet and stretches his hands for a quick fist bump with the accompanying cursed speech user, Kelp. Toj lets himself fall into the closest seat while Panda jumps on the bed to continue his rambling. Our first real mission. Not like the first one we had during our introduction, which wasn't a real one. But this is going to be our first real mission. An actual semi-grade 1 - Panda seemed happy. A semi-grade 1 mission should be more than what a couple of first-year students should be sent on. Yet Satoru had approved it with a grin. A test of his leadership then. This would be the first mission Jiki would be actively participating in with his classmates. He straightens his clothes before turning to face them. Ready. Salmon. We'll have the chance to dash with seeming agreement, Panda's rambling aside. They stepped out of his room together. Tokyo Metropolitan Jiu-Jitsu Tech served as both a school and headquarters for sorcerers who needed a place to lay low. It was extensively renovated and had the same capacity as most old clans. That is why it took them almost 10 minutes of walking down passageways, past gazebos, fanged statues, a little pond, and the cursed armory before they finally found their way to the classroom, where they found the waiting forms of Maki and Emi. The green-haired girl was performing a quick warm-up exercise consisting of lunges and stretches as they walked up to them, while the brown-haired Emi sat cross-legged, still attempting to figure out her innate curse technique, no doubt. Finally, "I thought you guys decided to ditch us or something." Jiki shrugged in reply. Benito flakes. "Our walk was longer," Panda grumbled. "Hi guys." Jiki noted the lack of stutter and almost smiled. An improvement, if nothing else. "Hey Emi-chan, at least we don't get any tongue lashing from you," Panda replied with his regular fanged smile. "Tongue lashing? I'll have you know that's enough." The sudden intrusion into their daily banter halted the conversation and put them on edge. Jiki, of course, noticed the man coming a mile off, yet what warmed his heart was the subtle, almost unconscious positioning that occurred the moment he spoke. Maki shifted to the side the same moment Panda set his heavy bulk in front of Emi, while giving enough space to the side for Toj. The only one outside of that formation was Jiki. He was not even sure they knew what they just did. It was something he beat into them so often that they had started flowing into the position instinctively. The man noticed it with a weird look on his face before turning to meet Jiki's eyes. That brief moment of eye contact was enough for the man to snap his eyes away. Atsuya Kusakabe. He was a big man. Almost taller than Satoru, with sharp brown eyes and a lollipop perpetually stuck in his mouth. His well-muscled frame was hidden behind a black suit and an even bigger brown overcoat. Jiki had read and even made more comprehensive files on all the noted characters in the world of jujutsu. So a civilian born without the aid of a clan that managed to reach the peak of regular jujutsu sorcerer classification said something about him. That he reached that point without an innate technique said even more about the tall man. "You're the first years, yes?" Kusakabe asked rhetorically. "I've not had much contact with the lower years, but I'm Atsuya Kusakabe, the instructor for the second years," the man continued. I've heard about your disastrous meeting with them. Sorry about that. He finished with a frown and a side look at Jiki. Disastrous was an overstatement. Yet their introduction to their seniors had not been the best. With that introduction, the group relaxed and gave their greetings. The older man continued after the formalities. Satoru should be here, but he was sent off. Something about retrieving one of the disgraced one's fingers from a cult down in Australia. The big man had muttered that last part to himself, but Jiki had heard it. He let a brief frown cross his face as he thought on those words. Something about that name had a weight to it. Anyway, the man continued with a scratch of his head. I'll be the one taking you to your exorcism. The location is a residential area, so you'll need someone to set up a strong barrier. That's where I come in. So get ready, we leave in 5 minutes. With his part said, he walked off towards the motor pool with a back wave at them. He's the one without an innate curse technique, right? Emi asked from behind, drawing him from his thought as she stared at the man walking away. Yes, Jiki finally spoke, his eyes on the brown-haired demure girl. Although I believe he already has an apprentice, he said gently in an attempt to let her down as softly as he could. It's okay, she answered with a shaky smile. Don't worry, Emi-chan, you'll soon get your technique down. It just takes a bit of time, that's all. Jiki refused to comment on the fact that the only reason it takes time is so the technique can etch itself into the growing body and soul of the user. Let's go, Jiki spoke up again, drawing their attention. This is the place. Maki asked as they stepped down from the bus. The feeling he felt from the building was a familiar one. It reminded him of the first time he was forced to interact with this world. The first time he stopped viewing the world from the lens of an outsider and a bystander. The time he was forced to act. Unleashing the black flames of Amaterasu in this world. Yet it was not the exact same. It felt different in a way. The building itself was seemingly harmless. A white-painted hospital with a large Red Cross sign at the top of its prodigious height. With the sun glaring down on them, determining the contents of the hospital was hard. The only notable aspect was how empty and quiet it was. Emerge from the darkness, blacker than darkness. Purify that which is impure. They all looked up at the liquid-like substance that manifested above. The black oily curse technique spread out above them before curving inwards, forming a dome shape and trapping them inside. Ring ring. He took his phone out of his pocket, flicked it open, and picked up the call. The barrier is set, Kusakabe said through the speaker. Jiki looked through the curtain at the brown-haired man. It was not the pitch-black curtain he was familiar with. This one was opaque enough to see through even if it seemed to block sounds. He turned his attention around to the suddenly dark hospital. The lack of sunlight highlighted and changed everything. The pale building stood as a looming sentinel in the darkness the curtain created. Its windows formed black eyes that stared back at them, waiting for them to stare and walk into that abyss. Shadows danced eerily across its white-bricked facade, imitating monsters and horrors, creatures of the past. The curtain's mimicry of nightfall triggered whatever was hiding in the building, and he could suddenly feel the cursed energy emission increase. His classmates hesitated at the sudden change in the atmosphere, with the only person that didn't seem to care much or even notice being Maki. The Zenin spun her long polearm to the side and rested her amber eyes on him. Waiting, watching, judging. So he did what Satoru had set him up to do. Lead. His feet made zero sound as he walked. The only sounds that echoed were the footsteps of his classmates following behind. Stop, he called out as they got to the waterfall in front of the double doors that lead into the hospital. Half-lidded red eyes remained at the entrance to the hospital. What's wrong? He heard Maki ask. They're coming. Like an activation trigger, 7 curses sprang out of the ground directly in front of the waterfall immediately after he spoke. Grade 3 curses. His quick readings of their cursed energy informed him. But these were smarter than your regular Grade 3 cursed spirits. They were smart enough to form a rudimentary ambush and abandon it when it was not viable. That said something about the caliber of curses that waited for them inside. They emerged from the ground like a fish slipping out of water. Something about curses allowed them a level of intangibility when they were not actively in combat. The 7 bipedal curses wore stitched-up skin that spread out obscenely over muscular bodies. Putrid bile seeped out of the stitches and they wailed out as one. We can't help. I'm so sorry, it's terminal. The first 3 charged at him while the remaining 4 curses leaped over him to engage the rest of his classmates. Smart enough to know he was the bigger threat, or was that just instincts? He ignored the 4 that moved to his teammates with the certainty of their victory. Instead, he focused his attention on the 3 that gently galloped towards him. Hungering maws were stretched wide and leaking spittle and bile. Terminal anaphylaxis. The one in the middle screeched out, but he ignored the words. Curses were known to draw words from a diminished vocabulary. Words they had perceived with some great degree of familiarity in life. Words that had stayed with them long enough that not even they knew their meaning, but those words had left a mark on most of them. He stared at the charging monstrosity and noticed it had eyes. A thought crept up that he found hard to discard. So he focused on it. He raised his right hand into the ram sign to focus his cursed energy before looking at the curse in its single green and all too human-looking eye and finally whispering. Demonic illusion, inverted allegiance. His cursed energy slipped into the oblivious curse, and it took a split second for him to set the cursed energy to go with the monster's own cursed energy flow, and when it did, it stumbled for a second, lagging behind the other 2. A split second later it regained its balance before leaping on its fellow curse. The betrayal was sudden and lightning fast. The fanged maw ripped and tore stitched skin to ribbons, while clawed appendages eviscerated its fellow curse with the unnatural madness and hunger every curse carried. He watched analytically as the wounded curse fought back, not understanding what was happening but following through on self-preservation instincts that followed it from its past life. The 2 inhuman monstrosities scrabbled and fought, cracking the ground, sending sickened meat and purple blood splattering on the bare floor like mad rabid dogs. The last one stopped a few meters in front of him, sending human-like confused glances at its fellow curses fighting before looking back at him. He had almost forgotten how weak curses tended to group together. Another leftover human instinct. Seeking power in groups. He was patient, so he stared at it, curious to see if it would truly attack. It must have sensed something in his cursed energy as it took a fluttering and confused step back. So they understood fear then. He tilted his head with curiosity. Now would it attack like a rabid animal, even knowing it was outmatched? He would never know that answer, as the sound of air splitting came from behind him. He let out a sigh as a long-bladed glaive blew past him before embedding itself deep into the cursed head. Maki tore after it, before jumping and landing hard on the polearm while gripping the other end for balance. The force of her landing dragged the embedded blade down hard, tearing through the curse and splitting it into 2 halves. He turned his eyes back to his first experiment. They had torn each other to shreds, he noted serenely. The surviving curse was barely hanging on by a thread as it stumbled to its feet. It was the one he used the genjutsu on. The surprise attack it let out had helped it come out on top in that brief bout. It turned to them and made to move before suddenly dropping dead. So its cursed energy flow finally disrupted the technique. Slower than it would have been on a jujutsu sorcerer, especially if they were in a heightened state, but faster than it would have been dispelled by a non-sorcerer. What did you do? Maki asked him with wary eyes as she walked up to stand by him. Made them think they were enemies. How? Panda spoke up behind them. Even the cursed puppet seemed unnerved by what it witnessed. Genjutsu, he stated carelessly, even if he knew they had no reference for the term. It proved that ninjutsu and genjutsu were possible. It had proven extremely difficult, considering it took him over a decade to figure it out, especially with a lack of stable chakra pathways to follow. Yet he had re-engineered it somewhat. Now came the important question. Could he teach it? Such knowledge would change the very fabric of this world. He was not certain what it would usher in. His eyes drifted to Emi standing confused with a cursed katana in hand. He noted the purple blood on the blade. To people like her, this would mean everything. Toge walked up to the scene with none of the wariness and shock that the others exhibited, carrying only curiosity in his eyes as he looked at the curses before looking back at Jiki with a thumbs up. He understood the sudden curiosity and lack of fear. This was something the Inumaki Scion could do theoretically. Convince 2 curses to kill each other. He could see the similarities. First, the way that the special grade curse affected their perception of smell back in Aiko's village, and now the way that Inumaki affected their targets with words. Olfactory and auditory genjutsu? Well, it doesn't matter. Maki spoke up, drawing him from his thought before spinning her glaive and sending purple blood flying. I was promised an A if we finish this in record time. Best believe I'm going to get that as she started walking towards the entrance before stopping and looking back at them. Well, are you coming? I can't be the only smart person here. They chuckled as they followed behind her. His phone rang and he ignored it as he tried to understand what he had just witnessed a few minutes ago. It was common knowledge that the younger Gojo scion was an anomaly. Even among special grades, the malevolent-eyed child was different. Eerie from birth, those eyes brimming with such negative curse energy were something inhuman. He would readily admit that he was wary of the boy. No, not wary. In the comfort of his own thoughts, he was not prone to lying to himself. Delusion was the privilege of the strong. He was scared of the boy. Like all teachers, he had heard of what the boy was capable of. Either while Satoru was talking his ears off or during their monthly analysis of their students. Kusakabe had seen a lot of things in his life as a sorcerer. Yet this was the first time he had seen someone convince curses to kill each other with only a look. Yet it was not just what he did or how he did it. It was his reactions or lack thereof. No, the only thing Kusakabe sensed from him throughout was curiosity and the knowledge that he had found a new way to kill. What a monstrous child. He stared at a strange etching just below a wall painting depicting a child running after a doctor with a smile on his face. We will spread out here, Jiki called out with a frown. It had not taken him long to figure out there was something wrong with the building. The dimensions were off, the angles sharp, and the space distorted. These irregularities were so minor he doubted any other person had picked them out. It was not a domain that he was sure of. Over the past few months, he had ample time to witness a domain, and this was not one. The strange scripts and seal etchings that could be found sporadically around the building had to be the cause. Are you sure about that? Maki asked in a challenging tone, one he could not even blame her for and even expected from her. The Zenin outcast had become something of a second in command among their group. Always ready to challenge and put him on his toes. Yet when they decided and finalized on a course of action, she took to it with startling ferocity and dedication. We're wasting time here, he answered before jerking his feet out of the curse he cratered into the ground. Doing his best to ignore the way its purple blood splashed and disfigured the beautiful painting. Something is not adding up. It has been playing with us. What do you mean? Panda asked as he dusted off his brass knuckles hidden under a puffy blue-colored cloth. Its curse energy is diffused around, managing to somehow enhance the resident curses and mask its own signature simultaneously, Jiki said aloud as he watched the rest of them finish off their respective opponents. They were in a reception area that was supposed to be on the 7th floor. It was widely spaced, a perfect place to combat multiple opponents. One they had taken to with relish, judging by the number of bodies they left behind. The first one is nothing special, but purposely masking its technique by spreading out its cursed energy like it's doing. That's not something curses do, he finished as they turned their attention to him. He refused to add the part where it was a noted Sengoku period technique used by sorcerer killers and assassins. The particular clan that created it was wiped out by the combined effort of the Gojo clan and the Zenin clan after one of theirs used the technique to kill a baby with the once-in-a-generation opportunity of bearing the 6 eyes and the limitless technique at the same time and a star plasma vessel. So what do you suggest? We just spread out and wait for it to ambush us one after the other. Maki asked with a frown. Yes, Jiki replied succinctly. Huh, was Maki's eloquent response. It is smart enough to not face us all at once, so we give it the chance and allow it to show its hand. So how do we split up? Emi finally contributed to the topic at hand, while Toj continued to keep a watchful eye out for any surprises. Emi, you'll pair up with Panda. Maki and Toj will go together, I'll be on my own. And that's the problem here. You'll be on your own, Maki cut in again, with a pointed finger at his chest. For all your talk about teamwork, you don't seem to partake in it much. He knew that is what it boiled down to in the end. They had heard the stories and rumors, but they did not understand. Not truly. They could not comprehend the vast gap between them, and he was not cruel enough to slap it in their face. Where they had learned on the laps of modern-day clans and tutors. He had been brought up on a diet of war, bloodshed, and things better left in the dark. Inserting himself into the dynamic they were forming would do them more harm than good. But that was something for another day. Judging from the fire in Maki's eyes. So he did as a leader was expected to. As someone who was seen as the first among equals. He compromised. Fine. Exactly. You can't keep running off, huh? Maki blinked wide amber eyes at him in surprise, while Panda, Emmy, and Toge chuckled in the background. The scene forced a smile on his face as he stared down at the green-haired teen. He would be a liar if he said he didn't enjoy throwing a wrench into whatever preconceived notions the girl had of him. He had a feeling it had something to do with being clanborn and being called a genius for so long. Okay. Emmy and I would go down the same way we came, making sure to check if there's anything we missed while rushing up. He would have preferred doing this alone or working with Maki at least. But he could not leave Panda and Toge with Emmy, not while a semi-grade 1 threat was running about. She would be an anchor around their neck. One they'll have to watch for every second. The rest of us continue climbing up. Maki finished his sentence with a sharp nod. Yes. If we make first contact, there will be enough of a ruckus for you to come find us. The same thing goes for you. They gave each other sharp nods before separating and walking off. He had walked down 2 floors with Emmy before spotting the most curious sight. At the end of the 5th floor corridor, a light shone through a crack, illuminating a functioning elevator. Jiki nudged Emmy to get her attention before tilting his head at the elevator. They shared a glance before he started leading the way. Are you sure this is a good idea? She asked him with a glance at the flickering lights that passed through the elevator doors. Which one? He asked her rhetorically with a soft smile. Splitting up in an unfamiliar terrain or walking into a broken-down elevator in a hospital with malice leaking out all around us? Both, she asked, unsure of which. Tactically, this is the worst option to take, he agreed easily. But it's the only one left to us at this point. The curse sees us as too much of a threat to reveal itself, so we're giving it a chance. By being weaker? She asked, unsure, as they finally got to the elevator. He pressed the button to open the elevator calmly. He didn't have much interest in walking the stairs, and the fact that the elevator suddenly started to work even though there had been no sign of electricity in the building drew his attention. He had a feeling something was waiting for them on the bottom floor. But we're not weaker now, are we? He replied to her as the elevator door creaked open with squeaking motions. He stepped in and turned to face his hesitant classmate. No, we're not, she finally agreed before taking a bold step to join him. A moment later, the door slammed shut behind her before it started to creak slowly. Movement. He noticed idly, ignoring the way Emmy had unsheathed her sword halfway in response. He closed his eyes and focused on his sense of balance. The elevator was taking them down. So he started counting. Judging from the distance between the floors and the speed of the elevator movement, it would take them 2 minutes and 30 seconds to get to the ground floor. Unless. Time passed, and his lips slowly parted halfway, forming a smile on his usually serene features. Seems like his deductions were right. It had been over 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and they were still going down. So there was a sub-basement level in the building. One they had not seen an entrance for, even though they searched the whole ground floor thoroughly. One that not even his eyes had made out. Ding. With that electric chime, the doors slowly creaked open once more, allowing the putrid scent of rotted and bloated bodies to sneak its way into the elevator. Emmy gagged beside him, doubling over to throw up at the harsh smell while retching violently. He had perceived worse the day he stepped into a discarded battlefield for the first time, the day he killed his first man at the age of 5. A kunai to the jugular. Your neck is perfectly positioned for a decapitating strike, he noted in an empty tone. Not judging or scolding, but simply stating. She jerked her head up sharply, left hand still on the grip of the sword, before dragging the forearm of her sleeve over her lips to clean them. What is that stench? Dead bodies, he stated with a nod at her response. She had recovered admirably. He began to walk forward. His hands were hidden in the voluminous folds of his haori, and his eyes were half-lidded. The perfect image of uncaring and carelessness. This should either be the morgue or the coroner's station. That was another thing that he disliked about the way jujutsu sorcerers acted. The lack of any real information on the job. He had personally searched the ground floor of the hospital in hopes of getting directions and a map that would have helped them coordinate better. I'm calling Panda, Emmy told him as she slowed down behind him. Tell them to search for the elevator on the corridor of the 5th floor, and barring that, they should head to the ground floor and break the ground closest to the back doors of the hospital. How do you know that? He answered her distractedly. We're walking down an incline. A gentle one, he noted with a quick tap of his feet against the ground. The hospital was built on higher ground, with the peak being the back to block the entrance from the harsh glare of the sun. He was speaking to her, but his attention was focused on his senses. Ever since he stepped out of the elevator, he had been able to sense the curse's energy signature better. And what he felt made him equal parts curious and concerned. The sharp sound of Emmy closing her phone and pocketing it finally drew his attention back to her. Good thing we are not in a specialized barrier. I heard we can't make calls through them, she told him before rushing to walk up alongside him. She didn't need to tell him that, considering he had witnessed it for himself. But he doubted she knew much, if anything, about the details of the Jorigomo incident. You've called them then? Yes, they're on their way, she replied, sounding more relieved. Did she not think he was enough to handle whatever they faced? Amusing. Yet he did not particularly see the need to correct her. She had gotten used to the stench, he noted. The civilian-born girl was remarkable in the way she adapted to things if nothing else. Their slow steps led them to a single door at the end of the corridor. A solid steel reinforced door that seemed like it was created for protection against a nuclear situation. Yet it was open part way. His eyes noted the depression left in the steel door. Depressions reminiscent of fingerprints. He walked up to it and rested his palm against it before pushing gently. It refused to budge a single inch, indicating the locking motions and gears were still in place. The door had been forced open, he concluded. Instead of wasting the cursed energy and effort it would take to widen the gap, he gave a nod at Emmy before slipping in. The room he stepped into was big. Still puddles of water littered the ground. The walls held mold and crumbling paint, and broken open grates revealed the dead and decomposing bodies of multiple men and women that were abandoned to rot the moment electricity suddenly stopped flowing to the morgue. The scent of decay and slow death was an insidious thing, hanging heavy in the air and attempting to starve him of his breath. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of decaying furniture and rusted metal, with a distant echo of dripping water and the faint whisper of a single breathing form ahead of him. Flickering lights further illuminated the surroundings and revealed a figure lurking in the darkness. Their silhouette was distorted, seated upon one of the numerous discarded autopsy tables and picking at the dead body on it. The scene created an aura of malevolence, one that seemed to heighten with every flicker of the light, judging by the way Emmy gasped as she followed in after him. The figure finally looked up. Predatory amber eyes stared at him before speaking. Jiki focused on the way the cursed energy seemed to roll under the flesh. With half-lidded eyes and fully alert senses, he picked up the mix of a curse and human cursed energy mixing beneath the skin like oil and water. Hello, Fateless One, I've been waiting for you. Fateless One. Jiki replied, curious. That was not a term he was familiar with. He had been given some unique and fancy titles in his past life, and this one. Prodigy, Uchiha's Bane, Genius, and the malevolent-eyed Gojo. But the Fateless One was a first. He stepped further into the room, walking sideways. He had not sensed an iota of danger or enmity yet, so he decided to indulge the strange creature. One who is not bound by the rigid structure of this world. That which is outside the parameters of this existence. That applies to all special grade sorcerers, doesn't it? Jiki replied with a raised brow. The more the creature spoke, the more the hairs at the back of his neck rose. The clack of bones breaking and rearranging themselves sounded out as its head spun slowly to track his movement till he was right behind it. Its head was twisted and facing backward like a demented humanoid owl, uncaring of the physical impossibility of the feat. The creature, wearing the face of a man, smiled. A smile that tore the cheeks on either side, revealing a grotesque Cheshire grin. It stared at him with a spark in its amber eyes. Eyes that spoke of knowledge hidden and hoarded. Yet not all have stared deep into the abyss of nothingness like you have, Fateless One. Not all have walked out of it twice. Jiki stopped. Every movement, every muscle, every sense that he possessed came to an instant halt for a moment, a split second before he resumed his walk. Yet it was a split second where he was vulnerable, but the curse did nothing but continue its grin at him. He was not even sure Emmy noticed it, standing by the door as she was with her hands on her unsheathed sword. He stared at it with fully open eyes. How? Things like that tend to leave a mark on your very essence, little Gojo. A mark that shows you've tasted of the forbidden fruit. A mark that says you've eaten your cake and had it. And these eyes see it all. Thoughts, analyses, and insights were created and discarded on the spot even as he continued to stroll, seemingly uncaring of the conversation. You see, fate has been written already, little Gojo. Everything had been put into motion millennia before now. Yet this was not written. Do you understand now, little Gojo? You're an anomaly. A fulcrum on which change and the impossible spin. Jiki's mind spun as it continued to speak. A reference to its eyes and its startling similarity to owls. From the way it perched on the corpse to its wide, unblinking stare, and the way its neck spun continuously to track him, heedless of the harm it caused to the body. An owl cursed spirit? Owls were known to have some significance and relation to death and dying. From varied roles as messengers to more specialized harbingers. Was that why? Even as he continued to walk, his brain spun frantically. His heart calmed as he dissected the truth of the words hidden in the flowery sentences. It didn't know everything. Simply extrapolating from what it had at hand. What it saw with those wide amber eyes. A mark on his soul? He should have expected it. Known that there would be something different about his soul. Especially after what he went through in his past life and his rebirth into this one. What are you? Jiki asked instead. An attempt to change the trajectory of the conversation, and the cursed spirit smiled in response. The more he looked at it, with his Sharingan using the little light in the room to pick at its features more clearly, the more it solidified his analysis of an owl-type cursed spirit inhabiting a human body. Its skin was pale and gaunt, eyebrows flared up to either side of its head, and nose hooked with a sharp curve down. You've not figured that out yet? Not even with those eyes brimming with so much potent and negative curse energy? So much hate, grief, and pain? I wonder, how many did you kill to get such eyes? What have you done? What sorrow have you unleashed or borne witness to that created such marvelous eyes, little Gojo? It came to him in a rush. It was so obvious in hindsight. They were rare but not so rare that they were unheard of. A vessel, Jiki stated with curiosity and amusement. The vessel's returning smile confirmed his words. The presence of cursed spirit and human cursed energy mixing, yet not joining completely, should have clued him to it earlier. An incomplete one, unfortunately. Despite the Zenin clan's effort, the vessel replied as it raised up an arm and observed it. The skin rippled and shifted, halfway forming something else before it reverted back to its default state. The Zenin. His curiosity had morphed into caution. Ah, surely you didn't think they sat uncaring of what the Gojo clan was becoming. Satoru's birth tilted the balance of power between the three clans. But your birth, the vessel continued with a crooked finger pointed at him. Your birth broke that scale. He had not been oblivious to what his birth had done to the balance of power. He had anticipated the other two clans making moves to either increase their influence or stem his. That was the nature of power and politics. He had simply not considered the measures the Zenin were willing to take. A mistake on his part. So what are you supposed to be then, some sort of Jinchuriki? He let the words slip out before he realized. Jinchuriki. It questioned with an owl-like tilt of its head. A human sacrifice. A human weapon. A curiously fitting term. I see, Jiki let out with a sharp breath, readying himself for the inevitable violence. So what now? His ears picked up a muted boom. Now, I have an offer for you. Fateless one. Jiki replied with a tilt of his head. Become my new vessel. A tilt of his brow. You believe yourself strong, don't you, child? Yet you have not seen the depths of power that true jujutsu sorcerers and curses are capable of. Not like the parodies and fakes of this era. I speak of true power, child. A time is coming when that is all that matters once more. He will bring it about once more. He looked at the vessel with a soft smile. Whatever interest he originally had died with those words. He could recognize it for what it was now. It was a desperate creature. It had hoped to shake him with the revelation of its insight into his abnormal nature. Then strike fear into his heart by creating a common enemy in the Zenien before finally giving an offer laced with poison. He had run better psyops as a 13-year-old boy. With your unwritten faith and my knowledge and power, we can take this world for ours. Boom. It spoke to him of true power. He had seen the deeds of his ancestors and read of their feats from the scattered hidden clan compounds during his days as a rogue nin. Watched from the impure world, the power his forebears called forth. The pathway to power was open to him now without the sickness sucking life from his frame. No, Jiki had no interest in whatever snake oil the vessel was selling. What he did care for was the mysterious person it had slipped up about. "No," Jiki replied easily. Why?" The vessel blinked its wide owlish eyes for the first time. Surprise etched on its face. Jiki replied with a shrug and a smile. He did not need to explain himself to it. Especially not after realizing how desperate it was. Had it truly expected him to be naive? Even after knowing he was not the average child. Boom. It stared at him for a long, unblinking moment. "Fine," it replied with a snarl. "This is not my first time dealing with a stubborn human." Jiki tensed his muscles, ready to counter. It leaped back away from him, with such force it pulped the body it rested on, heading toward the still confused Emmy. In response, his hand shot out to the side, and he gripped a trolley hard before spinning on his axis and flinging it at the point where he predicted the vessel would be, before dashing after his improvised projectile. It leaped towards Emmy, with an arm outstretched. Its almost 360 vision alerted it to the incoming projectile, and its left hand shifted into a grotesque-looking diseased wing that sheared the steel trolley in two in a display of inhuman brawn and sharpness. Jiki followed behind the trolley, unfazed by the sudden appearance of the wing, before slapping the wing to the side and sending a kick at the vessel. A kick that was stopped by a leg turned into a cruel, hooked, black talon. It all happened in what amounted to seconds. Faster than Emmy could comprehend, and by the time she blinked away her shock, the vessel had its still human right hand around her neck. Jiki buried his feet into the ground, putting a stop to his forward motion instantly. He stared at the vessel with eyes wide with an unfamiliar emotion. It was dead. That was a certainty. It had just not realized it yet. "Would you listen to me now, child? Would you heed my words and take the opportunity given for what it is?" It managed to gasp out, staring into his eyes even as its hand was forced to twitch wildly. Its body seemed to revolt at the effort the high-speed movement and transformations had taken on it. An incomplete vessel. He sent a minor genjutsu through eye contact. A genjutsu that messed with its perception of time. One where its cursed energy flushed out almost instantly. But in a fight of this caliber, almost was a death sentence. Crack. The roof above them let out a loud crack as a fissure formed on the concrete. A fissure that spread even wider as another deafening boom sounded out. The roof fell inward, and out of the dust cloud came the trailing form of Maki, with her Naginata behind her, a Naginata she swung down with the full force of gravity and her immense strength behind it. It slammed down on the hand gripping Emmy's neck with such force it was sheared off in a brutal blow. It blinked again for the second time, more shock than surprise. And Jiki was in front of it. This time he was the one with a fist wrapped around its neck. He curved two fingers on his left hand and sent them scything into its ear. The sensation of its eardrums and ear canal rippling and tearing made it howl. The moment his fingers pierced a blubbery mass, he curved them further before ripping them out, sending bone, wax, and scattered brain matter to the ground in a visceral display of well-calculated brutality. A flare of cursed energy, and he tilted to the side, narrowly dodging a decapitating strike from a sudden katana. He smoothly stomped on the blade, burying its cursed energy-enhanced edge into the ground. Something jerked the vessel by its head, and Jiki let it go, unwilling to contest it. The new sudden variables sent his reflexes and instincts into overdrive. Hanging him on the edge of cold-blooded viciousness, he shifted his priorities to eliminating the closest variable as quickly as possible. Spinning on the spot, he splashed the purple blood and the remaining entrails on his hand into his assailant's face, blinding and disorienting them. Before firing a kick at the head of the confused opponent, uncaring of the sickly sound that signified the breaking of the neck bone as the man's head forcibly twisted 360 degrees in response. He landed on the dead body in a crouch and without a sound. "What is this?" A voice called out. Young, Jiki noted. The person who snatched the vessel from his grasp. He stood up slowly and sent his attention to his classmates first. They were hunched around their most vulnerable teammate once more. Panda in front, with Inumaki and a wide-eyed Maki, stared behind him, while Emmy stood with her hands on her sword in a wide stance. Hands shaking, scared, or furious. With the confirmation his classmates were okay, he turned his attention to the 12 people who were hiding in the shadows dressed in all black matching clothes. The same as the man he had killed on reflex and who lay beneath his feet. A glance at the men in the shadows was enough for him to gauge them for what they were, insignificant. So he focused on the man holding the half-dead vessel by the scruff of its neck. His top half was hidden by the shadows he had jumped back to. If Jiki was not staring at him with his own eyes, he would have doubted the man's presence. He shifted his attention to the vessel. TSK. It was still alive, he realized with some annoyance, judging from the slow movement of its chest. Special grades had proven annoyingly competent at self-regeneration on a level even the famed Tsunade would marvel at. Killing them was proving to be an annoying challenge. Inhuman durability matched by unparalleled regeneration was proving to be an annoyance. Critical hits at vital organs had proven to be useless. Although he was certain a well-placed Amaterasu or even a great fire annihilation would work. Yet humans were still humans, he noted as his right foot continued to rest on the dead man. Passive curse energy reinforcement was not enough to stop an attack of a certain caliber from going through, and they broke all the same. What does it matter? They've seen what they shouldn't. We kill them, another man stated with a laugh. Stepping out of another shadow, the newly revealed man grinned up at them. He was an older man, dressed in more traditional clothes. He had short black hair styled into a mohawk, with thin eyes that were placed at a slant. The wrinkles on his face complemented his features, as well as the laugh lines on his face. His stooped-over figure brought back memories of the cursed spirit he faced months ago, Jogo. Jiki wondered as he observed the strangers. Were they working together with the vessel, or was this just an opportunistic third party that stumbled upon the fight? One of the black-clad men stepped up to the stooped-over man and spoke. The boy with the white hair, he might be his identity is inconsequential. They've borne witness to a classified operation. I believe they also conversed with the vessel. They're not leaving here alive, Hiroku. We kill them all. Jiki picked up on the man's intonation. There was something strange about the way the stooped-over man said those words. It lacked the strength of a command, bearing only the air of a suggestion. Was he not the leader? Who was it then? The young man in the shadows? We are students of Jujutsu Technical, Chojuro-san, Maki called out from beside him, before raising her hand and rapidly forming shapes with her fingers, sending out hand signs. Hand signs he did not understand, nor could he extrapolate from the short signs. Yet the strangers seemed to recognize it because they suddenly came to a stop, while the stooped-over man focused his attention on the green-haired teen with more interest. That is irrelevant to us. You're familiar with the language of the Kukuru unit, and you even know my name. Who are you? Ah, those fiery eyes. I remember you now. You're one of the twins, the man called out before his grin twisted into something cruel. OG's shame, he said in a tone that could have curdled milk. This close, he could hear the way Maki ground her teeth together, showing surprising self-control to hold back from lashing out at the man verbally. OG's shame. He wondered about the title. From her reaction, OG must have been her father then. But this was his first time hearing anything about a twin sister. Then again, Maki had never spoken much about her time in the Zenin clan. Have they finally found a use for you then? It matters not. The moment you laid your eyes on the vessel, your life was forfeit. Which is of no great loss, I'm sure. We are covered by the accord. You cannot. The short man's grin widened before he moved to a crouch, pressing his palms to the ground. Rules have no place in the darkness, fool. Jiki saw the moment the technique activated. The way the old man's cursed energy twisted and coiled into a semblance before finally sinking into the earth. Molding it. Earth style? His eyes widened as they spun in their sockets, taking in the way the man's cursed energy rolled and moved. He could feel that spark once more. Feel the way his nerves were alight with fire and memory. The immeasurably sweet sensation of enlightenment blooming. Yet he knew he could not let it. He could not allow the man to finish forming his technique. Not when his classmates were close enough to be affected by the attack, and in an enclosed bunker like this, facing an Earth-style user was death. Maki with me. Inu Maki. It took less than a split second to send cursed energy to his ears, while Maki already had earbuds imbued with cursed energy to mitigate the effect of her classmate's technique. The cursed speech user nodded before drawing down his tracksuit. The next instant, Jiki kicked up the buried sword, grabbed it mid-air, and blurred toward the man, side by side with a furious Maki. The Kukuroku unit moved to obstruct their movement, but was rendered useless by a word. An order, a command, a straightforward sequence of letters that formed a sound. Yet it was not the words that halted their enemies in their tracks. It was the intent behind it. The power and weight behind those simple 4 letters made the world go still. Stop. The Kuruku unit froze on the spot. They stopped moving. They stopped blinking. They stopped breathing. Yet for all the power in the word, it was arbitrary and spread out. Vague and easily misinterpreted on purpose, lending it immense temporary strength with little true longevity. Yet that was enough for Maki and Jiki. They blurred forward, speeding past still and corpse-like forms held in the seizures of time. He instinctively stopped himself from opening up the dozen throats that were laid bare and open to him. This was not the elemental nations. Even as the attacked party, there was a certain restraint expected of him. So he held back. Only 2 people had drawn his ire today. Only 2 truly needed to die. His half-lidded eyes picked up the impossible movement late, and he shoved with his right hand, pushing Maki out of an axe kick that broke the ground. She recovered quickly, flipping agilely and landing in a defensive stance. Jiki instinctively lashed out with his blade at the threat so close to him. The hair-splitting blow was halted by 2 hands clapping the sides and stopping it inches away from a throat. Narrow yellow cat eyes stared at him. The owner was a blonde-haired young man that stared back at him for a second before pushing his blade back. Jiki allowed the movement, taking a step back and come back to rest to observe the youth. He was fast. Too fast for his movement to be anything but a technique. Blonde hair, earrings at the tip of his ears, and a cat-like grin were the man's response to Jiki's detached look. "Naoya-san," Maki called out. Her voice was tinged with bitterness. "Naoya Zenin." That explained a lot.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.